Please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag. The Board of Adjustment meeting is now in session. I'd like to welcome everyone to the Board of Adjustments. Typically, we don't have this many people. My name is Frank Poplars, Steve Hayslip. We have Lisa Fosbury, Harvey Lemons, Jennifer Fontan, and Josh McGee. All right? So typically, we don't have this many people here. And because of the public interest, we're live streaming. So ladies, if you want to freshen up your makeup and guys comb your hair, so do it. The other aspect of it is if you've attended either the alderman meetings or the planning boards, there is a public comment area in those. We don't have, so to speak, a public comment. Everything that we do here is under oath and only dealing with facts and evidence. We are quasi-judicial, which means everything anyone says will be under oath with them swearing in. Understood? If somebody does have comments or wants public statements to be put in record, those statements will be accepted if it is fact and evidence that you are presenting. Again, not opinions. Understood? Okay. Also, as you know, from the planning board meetings or the aldermen, that the agenda moves along on whatever issues are ahead of or in front of them. We only deal with elements that affect the UDO. We either give variances or exceptions or permits or allowances or variances to the UDO. UDO is what we use as our point of reference. Understood? Okay. All right. We have two agenda items tonight. One is an accessory dwelling that we will hear first, and we'll have that, and then we will clear out and maybe have a 2 or 3 minute break while they clear out whoever's here to represent them, and then we will go in the second agenda item, which is the appeal by Southport Marina of the city's decision. Understood? Okay. From a board perspective standpoint, have everyone read all their materials for today? Any questions at all that we need to discuss before? Okay. All right. Who's here representing the accessory dwelling on 322 Brunswick Street? Okay. Rick Bandera. All right. Put your left hand on the Bible, raise your right hand. Do you swear to tell the truth, nothing but the truth, so help you God? State your name and address. Turn your microphone on.
Excuse me. Richard Bandera, 409 North Burrington Ave, Southport. Sure. Thank you. I'm here as the agent and representative for Donna and Robert Blakely, who just recently purchased 322 Brunswick Street in Southport. It's a lot down by Potter Seafood with an existing house on it. In the back of the site, there's a small utility shed that they want to convert to an art studio. The structure is that exists will have a new porch added to its western side and a bathroom off to its eastern line. The bathroom is 5 feet off of the eastern setback, and the northern edge remains unchanged. The new porch will be within the required setbacks. The total square footage of the entire footprint, counting the porches and the bathroom, is 372 square feet. And there's going to be some improvements with added windows and those sorts of things. But the basic height of the existing structure will remain, and the footprint will be expanded as mentioned. And that's really the application itself. The owners have informed me that they have no intention of renting it, if that's a concern of anyone. And it sits outside of it sits outside of the required flood zone, so it's outside of the AE zone and within an X zone, so it's not subject to the 50% rule of substantial improvements.
Any questions for Mr. Bandana? All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Who is here to represent the city? All right, come forward. Prepared? Raise your right hand. Do you swear to tell the truth and nothing but the truth, so help you God? State your name and address.
Thomas Lloyd.
Thank you.
All right, I'll just go through a report on this. As Rich said, this is at 322 Brunswick Street on an 11,861 square foot lot. It is to be a proposed accessory dwelling in an existing one-story structure. The applicants are adding a bathroom to the structure, which is how it falls under that accessory dwelling designation. In terms of what the UDO requires, there is not an existing accessory dwelling on the site. Therefore, it meets the requirements that there can only be one. It will also be owned as the same person that owns the principal residential structure, so it meets that requirement. The footprint of the structure will be 372 square feet, so it also meets that. The setback of the addition will be 5 foot from the property line, which meets our side yard setback requirements for a lot of that size. The proposed accessory dwelling will be under the 800 square foot requirement since it is at 372 square feet. The utilities will be connected to the main house, and there is an existing gravel drive and parking area that has adequate room to service the dwelling. It is staff's opinion that this meets the supplemental standards for accessory dwellings in the UDO.
For Mr. Lloyd. All right. Are we prepared to vote? Any discussion at all before we vote? Okay. All right. Do I have a motion, correction, that this A is use will not materially endanger the public health, safety, or general welfare if located where proposed and developed according to the plan as submitted and approved? Do I have a motion favorable or non-favorable for that?
I move the favorable motion.
Do I have a second? All in favor? We'll do it one by one. Pete? Say your name. Frank Poplars. All in favor? Aye. Okay. All right, second, that the use meets all required conditions and specifications. Do I have a motion approval, a favorable or unfavorable for that motion? Do I have a second? Any discussion? Okay. Vote. Pete? Favorable? Lisa? Favorable? Harley?
Favorable.
Frank Poplars? Favorable? Okay. C, that the use will not adversely affect the use of any physical attribute or adjoining properties, abutting properties, or that the use is in public necessity. Do I have a motion favorable or unfavorable on that? Do I have a second on the favorable? All right. Any discussion? Okay. Pete? All right. Lisa, favorable? Harley?
Favorable.
Frank Poppers, favorable? All right. Okay. D, that the location and character of the use, if developed according to the plan as submitted and approved, will be in harmony with the area in which it is located and in general conformity with the city's Southport's land use plan. Do I have a favorable or unfavorable motion on that? Do I have a second? Any discussion? Okay. Voting, Pete? Lisa? Harley?
Favorable.
Frank Poppers, favorable? All right. Okay, Mr. Bandana, the board has basically approved your request. I'm sorry.
As has been our custom over the past year or two, that accessory buildings to have a motion that puts a condition in it, they cannot rent it separate from the house. It should not be a rental property. So in that vein, I place a motion on the floor that the accessory dwelling shall never be used separate from the main house for any type of business or rental purpose.
Ms. Sharon, you got that? All right, thank you. Do I have a second on that motion? All right. Any discussion? Okay. Pete? Okay. Lisa? Harley?
In favor of?
Frank, in favor? Josh? Okay. Part of the documentation when you'll get it. Where are you? I don't see where you are, Rich. But anyway, you know that you'll need to get the written documentation before you proceed. The city will draft that up and either call you when it's available or mail it to you directly. Okay? Any questions? Okay. Thank you. Item, so let us get organized for that.
so sure whether the chair's going to want us to speak from here or from the podium.
Second agenda item we have tonight is Warden Smith on behalf of Southport Marina Incorporated, 606 West Street, an appeal of a staff decision. Are the city representatives here? Okay. And the Marina representatives are here? All right. What we're going to do is swear everyone in first, and then once we get everyone sworn in, then we'll begin testimony with the city, followed by testimony with the Marina. Okay? Understood? All right. Pardon me.
You know, I don't have any strong objection to that. To the extent that the Marina is the applicant or the appellant of the decision by Mr. Lloyd, it seemed to me to be most appropriate for them to present their case as to their objections or appeal of Mr. Lloyd's decision, and then for the city to follow to respond to what those arguments are.
We're good with that?
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Understood? You'll go first? All right? Understood. All right. Let's swear on the city side first. Mr. Lloyd, would you take go over and I've already sworn you in. Okay. All right. The attorney for the city?
I am.
Would you go in and I'll swear you in?
Yep. And I'll have Mr. Rez.
Pardon me? I'm sorry. I apologize to everyone. Has anyone among the board have concerns that they should recluse themselves? Lisa? Sir, do you have any issues with that? Yeah. All right. Thank you. Thank you, Pete. Thank you, Lisa. All right. They nodded. You're okay with that, Marina? Okay. Okay. All right. We'd like to swear you in?
Yeah, I'll be glad to be sworn in. This is Grace Stiers. This is Ashley Terrazas, also with Fox Rothschild. I don't know if Mr. Hargrove is going to be sworn in or testify or not, but it may be appropriate for him to be sworn in as well, if you'd like to swear us all in at the same time. Okay. Okay, just in case.
When I swear you in, you will take one at a time, your name and addresses, okay? Do you swear? And address? Okay? Okay. All right, thank you. Tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? All right. All right, thank you. All right, we've had the preliminaries over with. All right. All right, I believe we're up to the point where Southport Marina is going to address their appeal to the city. Okay? I apologize. It's a new territory for everyone here, so we got more attorneys correcting me than usual. Okay? All right, Thomas, do you want to lay out the sequence of events?
Oh.
Okay, so I'm just going to go through the application that's here in your agenda packet, and I'll go through the high points just so everybody in the public can understand what's going on as well. So this was an appeal that was filed on August 31st of staff's decision, and it is, let's see, it is obviously by Southport Marina at 606 West Street. And they are appealing staff's decision that that commercial marinas cannot be, or not a permitted use in the open space zoning district. You see all the addendums that are attached to that in your application. This was based on a permit for a zoning compliance permit that was filed by the marina on I believe it was July 27th, 2020 was when the city received it. And we reviewed this permit and based on, comparing it to the Unified Development Ordinance and the zoning map, it was staff's determination that it was not consistent with the Unified Development Ordinance. So you all have all the information in there. That's kind of what's happened up to this point. Are there any questions? Yeah.
About the procedural history and how we found ourselves here.
To reiterate, we received the zoning compliance permit on the 27th We sent a letter denying that permit on July 31st, and then we received an appeal on August 31st.
That sequence at all? Time frame, timetable? Okay.
Mr. Frank and I are prepared to take 2 minutes to each give you kind of an overview of what we're preparing to present to you during this hearing, kind of to, as an opening statement, if that would be helpful to the board.
Okay. All right.
Good afternoon. Do you mind if I take my mask off while I speak? Thank you, sir. Again, my name's Sam Frank. I represent the owner, Southport Marina, in connection with this matter. About a month into my legal career in North Carolina, I got a call from someone very anxious and disturbed, needing immediate help. And she told me that she had purchased a lot, second lot back on the ocean, 2 or 3 years prior, and built her dream home there. Up until the morning that she called me, that lot sat vacant. And on that morning, a construction crew was in place putting pilings in. And she was very disturbed that her neighbor was going to construct a house that was going to disrupt her view. That story is what this case is about. You're going to hear a significant amount of testimony today about several different topics, some technical reading of the code and the like. But what you should keep in mind is, at the end of the day, what this story is all about is the city changing a policy and practice that it had in place for over 30 years on the political whim in the interest of trying to protect a view that it doesn't have the right to protect. Thank you.
We're also trying to learn the procedures of whether we need to bring our own mics. But I see you have a mic here. Thank you for hearing our hearing this afternoon. My name is Gray Stiers. I am special counsel for the city of Southport in this case. This hearing, as we've already recognized, is going to be a little different than what you normally undertake here as a Board of Adjustment. Normally, you are looking at uses that are already allowed or permitted in the ordinance. That there may be a variance that's needed for a use that's already permitted on a lot, or more likely, like you've already heard this afternoon, there's a conditional use permit that you have to make certain findings as to whether it would materially endanger the public health, meets all requirements, the conditions, it will not adversely affect the physical attributes of the adjoining or abutting property, and you know your standards for conditional use permits. This hearing today is in some respects a little simpler than those, because in those conditional use permits you've got multiple findings that you've got to make based upon the competent material and substantial evidence presented to you by witnesses. In this case, it's really a fairly simple question of what is the use that is the Southport Marina based upon the facts and the evidence that's before you, and whether Mr. Lloyd's interpretation of that use under section 5.3 is one that you agree with or you disagree with under the language of the ordinance. Whether or not Mr. Lloyd properly determined that the Southport Marina is a commercial marina, or marina, commercial, as that use is defined in the ordinance and listed in the table of uses. That really is the only question before you today. Because if it's a marina commercial, then you apply the ordinance and see that under the table of permitted uses, then it is not allowed in the open space district. It's really that simple. Looking at the definitions, looking at the use, determining what the use is, applying it to the permitted use table. Let me say right up front, we recognize the value of the marina. No one questions the value of the marina in this community, the value of the marina of those who use it, We also very much regret that the hurricane caused the destruction that it did. That's not anything that we dispute whatsoever. But the issue isn't whether the marina should be allowed in the open space, but whether the ordinance, under a logical, reasonable reading of the provisions, does or does not allow a marina in the open space. And that's the only issue you have to decide today. Thank you very much.
So as a threshold matter, there's a few things that I'd like to achieve on the record this evening. And there's so much to talk about that there's the risk that this would run very long. And my interest in my next step here is to avoid that. And so I had intended to show you some slides on the screen. AV situation being what it is, I'm going to hand you copies of our presentation and make reference to that throughout. I'd also like to submit electronic format several records that need to be part of the record. The first is the UDO in question, the one that was in effect as of July 31st, 2020. The second is your zoning map, which was in effect as of July 2020. And the third is our information request to the city dated October 6, and also the city's response to the same, which includes various and sundry records related to this topic. I'm not sure who to hand that to. Should I hand that to Mr. Tarrant? Okay, thank you.
Okay. I'm not asking the board to rule on this question at this point. Certainly the UDO, as was in effect at the time of the application, is absolutely relevant and permissible and should be part of the record, and I support that submission. Also support the submission of the zoning map that's absolutely necessary for the analysis. The public records request, which we did respond to as required by law, they requested everything pertaining to any decision, any actions pertaining to this open space. Whether it is particularly relevant to the decision, whether there's a proper foundation, and I realize we're not in a court of law, but how that may or may not be admitted into evidence, I do have some concerns about, and I haven't thought through this. I wasn't expecting that entire public records request. So maybe, I don't know what to say except that that was a public records request that may or may not have extraneous information in it. I wish we had specific documents that were submitted instead of saying the entire public records request. I don't have a suggestion. Mr. Tarrant, I'm open to your thoughts. If you want to let it all come in and let us argue as to its probative value and weight, that may be fine given the informal nature of zoning hearings, but it just seems very odd for an entire public records request to be submitted as part of the record in a zoning case.
I would proffer that two things. First, all of those records came from the city. None of these records came from an external source. They are your records. And second, that the city's management of regulation of the open space district for all of the years leading up to this one, and their abrupt change in the manner in which they manage the open space district as of July of this year is exactly the relevant issue before you today, and that's exactly what those records reflect.
Certainly the response, I will say, are you saying the written responses to the three questions or all of the documents that went with it?
Both.
Referring to public records as it applies to just open space.
Yes, sir.
That was the limit of the request. That's true.
Mr. Frank, do you plan on making specific reference to certain documents during the course of your presentation?
There will be, I anticipate, testimony in the course of our presentation that is derived from information in those documents.
To the extent possible, and I think that it would be helpful to everyone involved, to the extent possible, I would recommend that during the course of your presentation, if you don't mind making reference to certain documents that may be available on this
Absolutely.
flash drive so that the board may understand and consider those as part of what's being discussed. I think that that's part of us as a board, and again, you know, please, board members, feel free to ask any questions you may have, that certain documents that they may not be aware of or understand are part of this, and without having the ability to actually look at it and inspect those, I think that is of a concern. I'm not really sure what the evidentiary prejudice would be to the city to have this made part of the record, but I would like to try and make it as easy as possible for the members of the board to understand what's exactly here.
Of course, and I can't reasonably ask the members of the board to make a decision about something that I haven't explained to them and that only exists in ones and zeros on that USB key. That exercise is solely for the sake of limiting the amount of time we spend introducing records that might later be useful.
Understood.
My presentation I'd like to distribute in hard copy. This is just 12 pages or so, and I'll during the course of what I say to you this evening, I'll refer to page number. Forgive me again, I plan for this to be on the screen, so these are double-sided, and so just a heads up that page 2 is on the back side of page 1. Without further ado, as I mentioned, my client is the Southport Marina, Inc., the owner of a very large piece of land located on the water here in Southport. If you'll turn to page 2 of the presentation that I just handed you, you'll see that parcel depicted on the tax records maintained by the county. You can see that the land owned by my client includes both the basin that is widely known as the Southport Marina, and also a significant amount of upland property on either side of that basin. For reference, immediately to the right of my client's property and immediately south of the end of Short Street is a small triangular shaped piece of land. That land is owned by the city of Southport. Recently, in response to strong political pressure from a small group of people, the city has attempted to abuse its power to strip away the marina's rights to develop its land. For decades, this city has honored the right of property owners to construct recreational docks on land included in the open space zoning district of the city and within the riparian areas adjacent to it. Southport Marina, of course, has relied on that practice. Part of the Southport Marina is located in the open space district, and my clients have relied on the city's consistent explanations that recreational docks are permitted in that open space district. Abruptly, and what appears to be an entirely political effort, the city ceased honoring those property rights a couple of months ago and declared that my client's private land could no longer be used for anything other than government purpose. That decision was a surprise, as you might imagine, and entirely wrongful. Thankfully, you, this board, have the opportunity to correct that wrong. Your review tonight is a de novo review, which means you have the opportunity to consider the facts and circumstances and make the correct decision that the planning director and city manager failed to make in July. The city's determination was inconsistent with its prior interpretation of the code. The zoning, as best we can tell, the open space zoning district has existed for over 30 years, and there are several docks located in the open space district. If you'll turn the presentation to page 3, you'll see a satellite shot that depicts a section of the dock located in my client's property. We refer to it as the rec dock. It's located on the east side of the Southport Marina operation. That rec dock was constructed in 2007. In 2007, prior to the construction of the rec dock, we sought a CAMA permit with permission to install it, together with the cooperation of the city to confirm that the installation of that dock in the open space district is consistent with the city's zoning code. If you'll turn your presentation to the next page, you'll see the certificate of occupancy that was issued by the city of Southport in December of 2008, confirming that the structure was built in compliance with the various ordinances of the state of North Carolina and the city of Southport, regulating building construction or use. Plainly apparent that a dock utilized for exactly the purpose that the Southport Marina utilizes its docks is permissible under the city's code, and specifically under the provisions related to the open space district. Though we need not look solely at the docks at the Southport Marina. If you'll turn your page to the next page, presentation to the next page, you'll see a reference to the location of the Cottage Point HOA dock, which is also located in the open space district. On this map, the green section of the map depicts the area that is subject to the open space district, and the red arrow is pointing to the community dock shared by many people that is the dock owned and operated by the Owners Association for Cottage Point. On the next page, you'll see a satellite image of that very dock. Turning again, you'll see a locator identifying the location of the Admiral Holdings LLC dock, which is also located in the open space district. And on the next page, you will see a satellite image showing that same dock. I don't want to belabor your time by going through each of these individually. The next page shows the locations of several other docks located in the open space district. And importantly, over the last 30 plus years, the city, by its own admission, has not once sought to claim that one of these docks is inconsistent with its zoning code. Not once have they issued a zoning violation, inquiry, or any other enforcement mechanism to call question to the right of the owner to install a recreational dock in the open space district. Southport Marina's planned expansion is also consistent with the zoning regulations and the open space district regulations. Prior to submitting a CAMA application, Southport Marina met with the city to seek comments on its plan and to get an explanation of any requirements or limitations that might be imposed by the applicable zoning or otherwise. Hank Whitley, the manager of the marina, participated in that meeting on behalf of my client, and I'd like to call him up now and give him the opportunity to tell you a little bit more about it. I'm not sure what you intend procedurally, but what I'd like to do is invite Hank to stand here at the podium, and then I'll stand nearby if that'd be all right.
If the city has any cross-examining you want to do at this point?
You know, at this point, there's been no evidence presented. There's been only arguments presented.
Okay.
I have indulged Mr. Frank by not interrupting his arguments. I think it's appropriate now to hear some evidence. So I have no objection to the gentleman testifying. But at this point, you know, I would ask that the board recognize that what you've received so far is not evidence, but simply arguments of counsel, and therefore I have no questions of counsel because there's been no evidence presented.
I would take exception to the idea that we haven't presented evidence. Of course, we believe the information we've presented does include not only evidence, but relevant evidence. I'd also say that at this point, I'm still in the middle of my presentation. I can make it very clear when we reach the end if that would be helpful to you.
Is that good?
So to the extent that we can make things as easy as possible, what I would suggest is that we wait until Mr. Frank has called his witness and he has asked his questions of the witness, and then at the conclusion of Mr. Frank's questioning, that we do give the city and Mr. Steyers an opportunity to ask questions of that witness, and then we can move on with the remainder of Mr. Frank's presentation. To the extent that there's a discussion over whether or not Mr. Frank's presentation reaches a level of evidence, that will be decided at a later time.
Thank you.
You okay with that? All right.
Yes, sir.
mask off.
Thank you for joining us this evening. I've introduced Hank already. You all understand that he is the manager at the marina. And Hank, I'd like you to specifically talk about the meeting that you participated in on February 20th with officials from the city for the sake of discussing our expansion project.
Sure. In the interest of transparency and clarity on how to proceed with our plans, because we were looking to expand our marina, I asked for a meeting with the city planner and the city building inspector, Thomas and Wayne, and they obliged with a meeting at, I think it was 9:45 or so in the morning of February 20th. I presented our plan that we had come up with.
Is this that one?
That is a copy of that plan, yes, sir.
I'd like to give you permission to go ahead and introduce these.
In our meeting, I presented this plan in an effort to gain clarity on limitations at the city regulatory level to understand what we would need to do to proceed with this expansion. During the course of this meeting, I understood that we would need to meet the parking requirement for these additional slips, and we would need to produce a CAMA permit to satisfy the requirements for the city, but that it did not meet the threshold for any city board or committee approval.
So when the city explained to you that no board approval was necessary, did you understand that to mean that you were consistent, your project was, expansion project was consistent with the applicant's?
Absolutely, absolutely.
In that meeting on February 20th, 2020, that wasn't the first time the idea of the expansion of the marina was raised, was it?
No, we planned for months or years.
At any prior time before that meeting, had anyone in the city indicated to you that your expansion project was inconsistent with applicant's?
No,
With regard to the use of the marina, are there any ferries that operate from the marina?
no ferries.
Are there any commercial operations, any vessels that move freight that operate from the marina?
No freight moving operations, no.
Thank you. Your explanation of the city's position that nothing need be done with regard to zoning is consistent with the representations of the city attorney to me in later months as well, and I appreciate you taking the time to explain it.
Sure.
At this time, we need to give the city attorney an opportunity to ask some questions.
I do have some questions and a number of exhibits. I'm just trying to figure out mechanically the best way. I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to walk over there with my microphone and handle it that way, so where I'm not walking back and forth. I think that's the best way I can do. So, Ashley, you want to come with me? Let's see. This is a little cumbersome, but I'll do the best I can. Actually, Mr. McGee, would you mind if I stood at the very end of the table? Would I be too close to you if I stood at the very end of the table there? Thank you. So let me ask just some preliminary questions. And as I said earlier, I'm very sorry about the destruction of the marina because of the hurricane. I know you're in the process of rebuilding. And can the board hear me from my microphone okay? Is it your intention generally to rebuild the slips and docks similar to what was there before the hurricane early this fall, generally?
Yes.
I want to make sure that they can also hear your question, your answers. So the materials describing the marina operations that would have been prior to the hurricane, they will still generally be accurate to what types of amenities and services you'll be providing after you rebuild the slips and reopen back up. Is that correct?
State your question again?
The materials, the website, the materials describing the marina services and amenities that were distributed and made available prior to the hurricane, they will generally be the same services and amenities that you'll be providing at the marina after the slips are rebuilt. Is that correct?
Yes.
So let me hand you what's been marked as Exhibit 1. And I will, so how would you like for me to, so I'm going to have Ms. Terrazas distribute them and give those to you. And actually, I'll also hand you what's been labeled Exhibit 2 as well. And ask you, is Exhibit 1 generally an aerial panoramic of the Southport Marina property?
Yes.
And likewise, is Exhibit 2 an accurate representation and picture of the Southport Marina as well?
For the most part, yes.
Let me hand you actually several different pictures and photographs that I'm going to label the entire packet Exhibit number 3. I'll try to make this as clear as possible. So Exhibit 3 consists of a number of pictures, and I want you to confirm that those pictures, generally are of the Southport Marina as it existed prior to the hurricane, and similar to what you expect it to look like after you rebuild the slips.
They are pictures of Southport Marina. They sure are. Every last one of them.
And are we getting a copy to you, Mr. Frank? Okay. So let me talk a little bit. I'll wait till the pictures get distributed. So Exhibit 3, is the entrance to the dock house of Southport Marina. Would you describe, what are some of the things a person could purchase in the dock house at the marina?
Drinks, snacks, fuel.
So you have fuel cells, gasoline cells for there near the dock house. Is that correct?
We do.
And you'd have food, snacks to go out from
Snacks
there as
and
well.
drinks, yes, sir. Light marine supplies and so forth.
When you say light marine supplies, what types of things could you purchase from the dock house in terms of marine supplies?
A PFD, a throw cushion for your boat, safety gear, that sort of thing.
The third, the next picture, is that an example of a slip or a dock where a person could put their boat at the Southport Marina?
It is.
Okay. Next picture would be, I guess, the pier going out to the various slips there at the Southport Marina. I think in the very bottom right-hand corner, you see the Southport Marina sign. So that would be basically what the marina would look like.
That is one of our docks, yes, sir.
And then the last page is a number of pictures taken from different angles, and those all also accurately represent, what the marina looks like. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So let me ask you, hand up, doesn't have a label on it. I'm going to ask that it be labeled Exhibit 4. And Mr. Frank, are you getting copies of pictures? Okay, great. So I'll label that Exhibit 4. Zimmerman Marine is located at the marina, is it not? Zimmerman Marine is?
They service boats. They repair boats.
They repair boats? Okay. Do they also sell engines and outboard motors there as well?
They do. Yes, sir.
Other marine equipment they sell also there is Zimmerman Marine?
They're really in the repair business and motor sales, yes, sir.
And then Exhibit 5, and so they're located as part of the marine services is to provide the repairs of boats who have boats there through Zimmerman Marine.
They rent space from us to do that, yes, sir.
So Exhibit 5 is another picture. And ask if you confirm that Yamaha engines, motors, are sold there at the marina as well, as indicated by the picture in Exhibit 5. Is that correct?
Zimmerman Marine, yes, sells motors through their Southport Yamaha name, yes.
Again, I'm trying to make sure everything's admitted into the record. Let me hand to you what I'll mark as Exhibit 6. I may not have enough copies for everyone, but I'll try. Exhibit 6, do you recognize what that is, sir?
Yes, sir.
And would you tell us what Exhibit 6 is?
It'd be a brochure.
And on the brochure, there's a list of services that are provided at the marina, is that correct?
Some of our amenities are included there on the back of that document, yes.
So, prior to the destruction, is that an accurate list of services and amenities that were provided by the marina or at the marina?
We can read through them.
And your intention after the hurricane is for this to also be accurate. Let me ask, is this an accurate brochure of the marina, for the marina?
I'd say it is. Yes.
It is. Okay. I'm going to go back to Exhibit 7. I'm sorry I don't have enough copies for everyone, but I'm just going to ask that be admitted into the record after my questions. I'm going to ask you, is Exhibit 7 a brochure describing the services that Zimmerman Marine provides to at the marina?
That is the intention. It includes their other locations too.
And on the second page of that Exhibit 7, it notes that those services include engine repairs, which I think you've already said is what they do. Is that correct?
It is. It's correct.
And repowers, they also perform that service?
Yes,
And they have marine electricians there as well?
they do.
They do cosmetic repairs to boats?
They do.
Fiberglass structural repairs?
Yes.
Okay. And spray painting there as well?
No spray painting there.
No, okay. But do you know if they do interior modifications to boats there at the marina?
I would say they do.
Okay. So is this consistent with your understanding of services provided by Zimmerman Marine at the Southport Marina?
Mostly.
So I ask that to be also admitted into evidence. upon the reconstruction and the intention and plans of the marina, if someone is taking a boat up or down the intercoastal waterway and they want to reserve a slip to stay there at the marina, to have their boat there at the marina as they're passing through, can they make a reservations to do so?
Once we have docks again, yes.
Okay, so once you have docks there, you will have them available for reservations, is that right?
Yes.
Okay. Let me hand you what's been marked as Exhibit 8. Is this the reservations request form that someone can make a reservations once you have docks and slips rebuilt, if they want to stay there as they're traveling in the area? Is that correct?
Yes, you can initiate a request from this form, and we will either accept it or deny it.
Is there a cost to having your boat there if you make reservations to
Yes.
to have your boat at the marina?
Yes.
Let me hand you what's been marked Exhibit 9. And ask if this is also from the Southport Marina website.
It is, yes.
This is your rate card for your dockage rates.
It was, yes.
At the time this was published, it was accurate.
Right.
And once you rebuild the slips and docks at the marina, you will have a new rate card for charges of the slips and docks, I assume.
Yes.
So would you just explain to me your dockage rates in the upper right-hand corner? I'm not so sure I understand those dockage rates and how that's set out for someone who wants to leave their boat there.
There's a different rate for a different length of time and length of boat that you want to store, so they're charged accordingly.
And this sets forth what those rates are for the size of the docks
And the length of the term.
and the length of the term.
Right.
Okay. So in the site plan that you presented on February 20th, that showed, I believe, 86 lift slips along the intercoastal waterway. Is that correct?
86, 88.
Subject
lifts,
check.
Yes.
So would it be the intention of the marina to charge to keep your boats on those lift slips that you proposed in the site plan that you presented as an exhibit earlier?
Yes, sir.
And that would be included on your dockage rates?
Yes, sir.
So it wouldn't be free to stay in those, to keep your boats on those lift slips?
Correct.
I have a few more questions, but I can ask those questions back over at my desk, so I'm not crowding Mr. McGee here on this side. So I'll go back over to my seat over here. And just a little clarification on the exhibits. You know, if I had to replace an engine or buy an engine there at the Southport Marina, I could buy an engine from Zimmerman Marine there at the Southport Marina, could I not?
Presumably, yes.
Regarding your February meeting, do you know if anyone looked at a zoning map at that meeting, a zoning district map?
No, I don't know.
Do you have any recollection that anyone did?
I do not.
Do you have any recollection that anyone talked about the zoning districts for the marina at that February meeting?
No.
Prior to July 27th, did the Southport Marina ever submit a zoning compliance permit application?
No, that was the purpose of my meeting in February.
But there was no application filed.
I was not told that I needed to complete an application.
And were you given anything in writing from the city as a result of that February meeting?
No, again, that was the purpose of that meeting, to figure out what I needed to put in writing, if anything.
Okay.
Which
But
I
nothing,
was
that-
told, which I was told what I needed to put in writing was our parking requirement, how we met the requirements of the parking. It's 1 to 4, I think is what it is, that was required in the UDO.
the city did not provide you anything in writing as a result of that meeting?
No.
No further questions of this witness at this time.
Mr. Funk?
Before we ask Hank to sit down, I would like to ask him a few follow-up questions if I could. Mr. Lloyd, do we have a copy of the zoning map in the room?
Yep.
Is there one available that we could share and copy with the board, or that they could at least see?
Sure. I have one that I was going to submit as an exhibit too. I was going to submit exhibit. I'll let me bring it over to you, let you look at it. If it's acceptable, we'll hand it up.
Please do. That'd be great. Thank you. Thank you. And while they're working on that, Mr. Whitley, are you familiar with the zoning map as applicable to the Southport Marina property?
I am.
And how many zoning districts, to your recollection, are applicable to the property?
I think it's 2.
Yeah, you're right. It is. Yeah. The open space district, this is yours. Okay. Yeah, that appears correct. If you'd be kind enough to distribute copies, I'd be grateful. If you don't mind, give Hank one first, since I'm going to ask him some questions about it. Okay. The open space district is depicted in green on the zoning map. And then the business district, or BD, is depicted in pink on the zoning map. Does that look familiar to you?
It does.
Now that you have it in front of you? Okay. Absolutely.
Sam, you got any problem with us marking this as Gray's Exhibit 10 and 11? Or, okay.
I think everyone has one now.
Sale and repair of motors, sale of fuel, sale of goods, life jackets, and the like. Where, between the business district aspect of the marina and the open space district aspect of the marina, where are those services currently, or were they provided immediately preceding the hurricane?
What district, is that what you're asking?
Yes. Which portion of the marina?
Business district.
So you weren't selling any motors on boat slips out in the open space district? You weren't doing any fiberglass repair out there?
No, sir.
No. And with regard to the transient slips, is there a particular part of the marina where you lease transient slips?
Mostly on our transient dock, which is at the end of C dock.
And that's also, it's also where you sell the fuel, if I'm not mistaken, right?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. If the expansion goes forward as planned and as depicted on the site plan that we depicted earlier, the marina would add several slips in the open space district. Is there any plan for the marina to provide any of those commercial-like services in the open space district portion of the expansion?
No.
If the city had indicated to you that a limitation of your expansion plan is that you would not be able to rent transient slips in the new slips that were located in the open space district, would you have proceeded with your plans?
No.
I'm sorry, it was a complicated question. Let me make
It
sure.
was a complicated
Could I hear
question.
that again, too?
I beg your pardon?
Could I hear that question again?
Yeah,
too?
no, that's bad lawyering on my part. I apologize. If the city had told you, with regard to your new slips, your new lift slips in the open space district, if the city had told you, you can't do transient rentals in those slips, would you have stopped the project, or would you have moved forward and accepted that condition?
Transient rentals?
Yes.
Sure. We'd have kept going.
Are there any commercial-like uses, the sale of goods, the sale of fuel, the repair and maintenance of boats or motors, that were described in that last sequence of cross-examining questioning that you intend to perform in the open space district components of the expansion of the marina?
No, sir.
Thank you. That's the end of my questions.
Any further questions from the city? Okay. Thank you. City.
Actually, I have one or two questions, just very, very briefly. I'm sorry, thank you. There is a fence around parts of the marina, is there not? I'm trying to think, I've been out there a few times.
We do have some decorative fencing and so forth, yeah.
And how many entrances are from the land, from the mainland side? How many vehicular entrances are there into the marina?
I think 3 in the main parking lot, 3 into the main parking lot, 1 into our west side, 2 into our boat ramp area.
Would those same vehicular entrances be used to reach the slips that you're proposing on the 86 slips in the open space area? Are you having a separate entrance only for those slips?
I'm not sure I understand what you're asking.
Will there be any separate or different entrance to the marina because of this expansion?
We don't plan to change any of our entrances.
So to reach the new slips and the expansion would be through the same entrance as the rest of the marina?
Yeah, sorry, it's kind of a tricky question to answer. With the proposed plan, if it carried out like it's depicted, you could enter these lift slips on the waterway
But from the mainland by vehicle, by car?
through either our existing docks
But
that we already had.
There's no new entrances planned to reach those slips. Yeah, so let me try again. I'm sorry, I'm doing a poor job. The only way to reach those slips, the new slips, is going through the existing Southport Marina, is it not?
With the exception of the entrance to our existing dock over towards the yacht basement. I don't know how to best explain it. Over towards where the city dock is, where we have another dock there.
And you're not planning to build a fence or barrier to separate the new expansion from the rest of the marina, are you?
No, sir.
Okay, no further questions. I didn't know if the board has any questions of this witness before he be excused, because we had talked with Mr. Tarrant about this being the opportunity for board members to ask questions at the conclusion of each witness's testimony.
Josh, do you have questions? Microphone, Josh.
How's that? Is that better? How many existing slips are in the marina? I just did a rough count. And looks like 100 or something like that. Is that close?
0. To be honest with you, we have 0 right now. All of our docks got wiped out by a hurricane.
Right.
But prior to the hurricane, it was about 200 slips.
About 200 slips?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Okay.
That's wet slips, slips in the water.
Right.
And we have about 350 dry slips.
Okay. So if you added 86 or 88, you're looking at what is that? 25 to 30% increase, roughly? Huh? Then what is currently existing?
But these will be dry lift slips.
Right.
So we have 350 dry slips right now.
Yeah. I'm trying to get at something here, but it's probably just something I have
It's okay.
to internalize. Here's a question. I don't know. You're probably the right person to ask, but why? Because I'm an architect, and I'm wondering why would you not, or why did you not consider expanding and reconfiguring the basin reconfiguration area, which is sort of clearly in the business district, and there's land over there available? Why would you not utilize that area as opposed to coming out here? And I have a second question too. Who is the authority having jurisdiction out here? Is that CAMA and did you run this
CAMA, yes,
past
sir.
them? Did you run this scheme past them to see what they felt about it?
So after my meeting in February with the city planner, the city building inspector, and the codes administrator,
Right.
we prepared our CAMA application, which is the required process,
Right.
and submitted it to CAMA. Yes, sir. In March.
In March. And you haven't heard anything from them on that? Any sort of a early on view of, yeah, it looks good, or no, it doesn't look good, or we'll have to think about it, or have you heard any kind of thing from CAMA?
It was held at that point, and Sam can get into that later in his presentation, but it was held at that point, I think, for a riparian line issue with the city.
Okay. So CAMA never really...
Not because of the lift slips, but because of a riparian issue.
So CAMA never really ruled on this?
They have not.
Okay.
No, sir.
Okay. I've got a couple more, but I'm going to pass and let somebody else take the floor.
Yeah, I got one. Mr. Whitley, what the proposed fixed pier coming out from the yacht basin that goes out and then around the corner, which is proposed floating dock, that's not part of your 86. What is the plan for the usage of that and the purpose of that?
So Mr. Hayslip, just to clarify, that part of the dock that comes off of Brunswick Street there.
Correct.
You see it comes off in kind of a dog leg, if you will. First 2 or 3 sections are fixed pier, and then it goes down to a floating dock where there's actually water to float it.
Right.
In the yacht basin. At which point it goes to the corner.
Right, so what is the purpose of
comes
that
up.
floating dock? Is that just to access those new slips, or are boats gonna be tying up there? Are that gonna be slips too? What is the proposed usage of those areas?
Potential slip rentals.
Pardon?
Potential slip rentals.
So there's an additional amount of slips then, as opposed to the 86 you're showing here?
A linear slip, yeah. It's in the CAMA application, sure is.
Okay, so.
Mr. Hayslip and members of the board, forgive me for interrupting. Hank Whitley is the manager at the marina and handles the day-to-day operations there, and he's been very involved with the application for and the conversations with the city about this. We also intend to bring Mr. Robin Rose up, who's a representative of asking whatever you choose to ask. But I wanted to make sure,
As long as this gets answered, I'm okay.
wanted to make sure that you
Some
knew that
point in time, I'm
we
good.
had another witness coming.
Right,
Thank you, sir.
yeah.
That is a floating dock.
Said that, I didn't know, it's very clear what you're gonna plan to do along the waterway, front, you know, the intercoastal waterway, but there's a whole blank right around that corner, and I was just wanting to fill in that blank. Is that gonna be another
Understand.
30 slips that we're not aware of, or
I
what,
understand.
you
It's
know?
just a linear
I got
floating
you.
dock, you know.
I got you. I'll wait for Mr. Rhodes.
Okay, any more questions?
I want to ask a question. We were given these documents or exhibits and told that it was not evidence. Is this or is this not from the city, and is this or is this not evidence, and these slips actually do exist?
So, the documents that you were handed at the onset of the hearing by Mr. Frank are exhibits that have been submitted by the applicant, by the marina, and those are submitted as evidence in support of their application. So those first documents, which would have been the packet that took the place of the presentation that, due to technical difficulties, is no longer moving forward, that package, this flash drive that we had a discussion about as far as the public records, as well as the UDO, and the plans that was in the larger map. Those documents were submitted initially during the opening statement and then Mr. Whitley's initial testimony. Everything else has been submitted by the city as evidence in support of their position. But they're all in the record and can be considered by this board. You're welcome.
If I can clarify, this map that you identified, Ms. Fosbury, we presented into evidence through Mr. Whitley because this is the map that he took with him to the meeting with the city on February 20th. This is the map that was on the table. There are not currently slips in these locations.
So that was submitted by Mr. Frank as an exhibit during his initial opening statement.
Right.
That can be considered by the board. It will be up to the board to determine its evidentiary value when making its decision.
Thank you.
Does that seem to comply with your understanding?
Yes, sir.
Greg?
I respect that as the ruling of the board.
Any further questions of the witness? Right, thank you.
And let me clarify that for our part, I, Mr. Rose, and Mr. Whitley are here, and we're happy to answer questions that you may have that may develop as the conversation goes on. To the extent that we feel, or that you feel, that one of us is the right one to pose a question to, please don't hesitate to interrupt proceedings and ask that question. Earlier, I made the assertion that the city has not made any effort to enforce a claimed zoning violation for any dock located in the open space district. And I should explain that my basis for that is the FOIA request, the Freedom of Information request that we submitted and the city's response to it. And the reason that I couldn't answer Mr. Tarrant's question directly, will we present the records from that USB drive that are directly in support of the assertions we make, is it's the very absence of records that leads me to that assertion. We asked the city to provide any and all information related to such enforcement, and they provided no such records. Before the discussion about the several different types of uses in the business district component of the marina, we were talking about Mr. Whitley's meeting with the city prior to putting together the CAMA application back in February. And he told you about his conclusion walking away from that meeting and his understanding of the very explicit direction from the city officials in connection with the same. all of those comments from the planning director made sense. The plain language of the UDO allowed use of recreational areas. And there was no distinction with regard to those recreational areas as to whether they were in connection with a residential lot or a non-residential use. This determination is not an academic one. There are significant practical consequences to the city changing its tune midstream. For a period of over 3 months, from late April until July, officials at the city led my client to believe that they were interested in discussing mutually beneficial solutions for the expansion of the marina and the reconstruction of the city's dock and boat slips at the same time. It's now clear that the city was not interested in any such solution at all. When the city finally made its true motivations clear at the end of July with the issuance of its arbitrary determination, it prevented both my client's project from moving forward and the city's project from moving forward. While the Southport Marina patiently waited and sought to further a cooperative discussion, it's now clear that the city had already made up its mind, and they were simply buying time to revise the UDO to specifically target the marina and to attempt to prevent a long-standing previously permitted
At this
use.
point, I've given Mr. Frank a lot of leeway. We are here to present evidence to this board to make a determination of the issues before the board, not to hear arguments at this stage in the proceeding. So I object to Mr. Frank's continued arguments to this board. If he wants to present evidence, I ask that he proceed to do so.
I agree. I think I understand where you're going, and I'm not sure we're ready to go that direction. So you have something that you want to present, I suggest you do it, and then call your another witness, okay?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd be pleased to call my next witness.
I do. You kept referring to recreational area. There is nothing in any of the designations of the city called recreational area. It is not a designated area.
It's a challenging thing. There is very little direction around that term.
But
On your-
right now, there is nothing in the city map that says recreational area. You understand that?
I'm referring to the table of permitted uses, sir.
I'm just referring, you said recreational area. We don't have one.
On the table of permitted uses for the open space district,
I'm just referring to what you said. You said recreational area. We don't have one in the city.
correct, there is no
Okay,
recreational
that's
area district. You're absolutely
Okay.
right.
All right, thank you.
I believe that the zoning code is already part of the record, the ordinance that was in place. All right, at this time, I'd like then to call Robin Rose, who's a representative of Southport Marina, Inc., the corporate citizen who owns the property. I'm going to sit at the table and let Robin take the podium.
Sworn in, so you're ready to go.
Robin, could you tell us a little bit about Southport Marina's plans to expand the marina?
Yeah, we've always had plans to expand the marina from the day we bought it. Obviously demand drives that, and in 2016, 17, we were coming to full max, and at that time we decided it's time to expand the marina because there were nowhere to put boats. We were getting requests, but we had nowhere to put them. So we started making plans to expand our marina, having the understanding that we did from day one that we would always be able to build docks in open space as long as it's recreational. Had no questions about that. That wasn't even a question in my mind. If you look at the overall map there, you'll see the rec dock that goes up and over the open space. That's the open space area. It goes up and over, so not impacted. We proposed the same thing on the 86 lots to go up and over to get to the lifts. So we've always had plans for expansion. It was just when demand drives it. Demand was driving it, and it's still driving it now until the catastrophe we had. And we're hoping that when we get back open, we'll get some of that same demand.
You described that you've been planning that expansion for some time. Back in 2017 and 2018, did you have a discussion with the city about a potential, well, tell us a little bit about that time.
Well, and there was obviously different people around the table, but at one time we had engaged with the town to help build their city dock, and it was a win-win for everybody. We were going to build the dock at our expense, do the dredging at our expense, and rent the slips for the city and manage the whole thing. City didn't have to do anything. Once we recovered our expenses, we'd hand the dock back over to the city. Period. It'd be theirs going forward.
What happened to that conversation?
It pretty much died. There was a lot of public outrage that didn't want the marina to have anything to do with city property or city docks. And that's what happened to it. So it pretty much died. But we, you know, in the next several months, we decided we needed to still move forward because we were getting so much demand. And I want to make one thing clear. The lifts that are on the waterway, they are for bigger boats that we can't get in dry storage. That's what that's for. We get an awful lot of requests for bigger boats that we can't. We were full in the wet slips. We couldn't put them in dry storage because they were too big. So we wanted those lifts to handle the bigger boats. So just wanted to make that clear, make that statement.
You explained that demand's rising. Who are your customers?
Well, we have right at half of the people in our marina right now from Southport surrounding areas, at least 50%. 46 if you want to get technical. 46% in Southport and surrounding areas. Those are our customers.
And following the meeting that Mr. Whitley described earlier, did you have about riparian rights?
Not at that point. When Hank reported back to us that we needed two things to move forward, and that was to get a CAMA permit and to prove that we had adequate parking, that's when we started spending real money. I mean, that's when we started putting everything together, all the pieces, hired land management out of Wilmington to help us through the CAMA process, hired engineers. I mean, we have spent a tremendous amount of money based on what direction the city gave us to move forward with our permit.
Start that over again in answering that. After that meeting, you had what with the city to move forward? Say that all.
After Hank came back and said, we need two things to start our expansion, a CAMA permit and prove that we had parking on our property to handle the expansion, which we did. We had both. We submitted to CAMA, and I believe we submitted our parking. I think we sent that to you, Thomas. I'm not real sure, but I'm pretty sure we sent our parking requirements to you, and we put in a CAMA permit. At that point, we were notified by CAMA that the city also had a CAMA permit that was in play, which we weren't aware of. You know, we didn't know what was going on at the marina after that whole thing got shut down. So we were notified, and they said because of the marinas, because of the city docks shape, you guys have to line up. In shape it was after those two hurricanes, you have to line up your riparian lines with the city. Y'all need to come to that agreement. Once you come to that agreement, we can move forward.
And was your understanding that based on the response from the city needed some riparian rights that would otherwise be yours in order to improve their dock as they intended?
Again, I've been very patient in allowing Mr. Rose to testify at great lengths, but I don't know what this has to do at all with the zoning classification, zoning ordinances, and the question before this board, so I'll object as regarding relevance as to any issue before the board.
This line of facts speaks directly to the city's course of conduct in interpreting their zoning ordinance over a long-standing period of time, and is therefore relevant.
So, Mr. Chairman, I'm gonna defer to you, obviously. I would remind you that it will be up to the board to determine the sufficiency of the evidence during their discussion and decision-making process. So it's up to the board's pleasure as to what they would like to hear.
Well, at this point too, we're hearing hearsay because we're hearing what he said to him, what somebody said to them. So I don't see anything that's in writing or anything that is supporting this. So let's move quickly through this, because right now, I'm not getting any feeling that there's anything substance except hearsay to hearsay to hearsay. Okay?
Understood, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Okay.
Did you submit the CAM application
We did.
for your dock expansion?
We did.
And do you recall when you submitted it?
Early March.
And when you submitted it, were you required to provide copies to anyone else?
Yes, to the city of Southport.
And you're required to provide it to the city of Southport because they have regulatory authority, or because they were your
They were
immediate neighbor?
adjacent neighbor.
Okay. Do you recall the date that you submitted that?
Not the date, but we have documentation of when it was delivered to the city of Southport, which was March the 16th.
The CAMAS process gives neighboring landowners a period of 30 days to object to a CAMA permit application if they are so inclined. During that 30 days following March 16th, did you hear any objection or receive any objection from the city to your CAMA application?
No, we did not, and nor did we expect it. We'd always been told we could do that.
Sometime following that period of time that the city did not object to your plans, did it come to your attention that anyone with the city had submitted a complaint to CAMA?
No.
And in later April, did it come to your attention that the city was holding a workshop to discuss their new UDO?
Well, I think 3 days or the next day after the city got the submittal, it went on somebody's Facebook page over by the restaurant quarter at the Southport Basin. And then things kind of got crazy from there.
Understood.
I can expound on that, but I don't know if you want me to expound on it, say no. Okay.
Thank you. At this time, I would, without the ability to play audio for records, I would like to ask that the public records that are the recordings from the city's UDO workshop conversations that relate to the open space district, and the records from the public meetings where the planning board and the board considered that UDO be made part of the record.
Could you speak into the microphone?
Thank you very much, Chairman. I'm sorry. To the extent the current application and appeal of Mr. Boyd's interpretation is under the old UDO, and that's the UDO and provision that this board is subject to interpreting, and you've got to determine the old UDO, the new UDO, and how it was implemented and what was said by anyone is not relevant to any issue whatsoever before this board as you try to interpret what the language of the old UDO was. And so I've failed to see any relevance whatsoever to the question before this board is how to interpret the old UDO.
I respectfully disagree. The UDO workshop audio will demonstrate to you that the city officials in the room understood that the then current UDO allowed the marina operation in the and indicated a wish to change the future UDO accordingly. That acknowledgement is an admission by the city that the prior UDO allowed the marina operation and is therefore relevant.
It is only this board that can, this planner and this board that can interpret what the UDO means or doesn't mean. So what may have been said at a public hearing by an alderman individually that doesn't constitute a decision of the board, you know, And even if it did, it doesn't have any applicability to how this Board of Adjustment interprets the former UDO. So I don't see the relevance.
And I respectfully disagree with that as well. The standing practice of interpreting the UDO in one fashion, as evidenced in part by those records, is important and relevant to your determination tonight.
I think that it's our responsibility to make those interpretations regardless of what somebody else from the city would say. And I think, Colin, do I speak to that correctly?
And I think from a practical standpoint, what I'm a little bit concerned about is entering into evidence audio recordings that we don't have before us to hear today. So from a practical standpoint, I do think that that is of concern. We're asking, Mr. Frank, what I believe you're asking is for the board to consider audio recordings that they can't hear.
Mr. Frank had the opportunity to subpoena witnesses. I can't cross-examine an audio recording. I can't go back and recreate who said what, when, where, how. If he wanted to have subpoenaed witnesses to come in here and state what the Board of Aldermen's view was back in June, he could have done that. But you can't submit an audio recording that I can't question the people that are on that recording.
Yeah, I mean, I tend to agree with you, Mr. Stiers. Like I said, from a practical standpoint, I have concerns over the evidentiary value to this board and the appropriateness of considering what, at this point, I'm not even sure what those audio recordings state or say, and we're asking the board to consider what you believe it indicates. So for purposes of being able to weigh the evidence before them, I'm not sure how we can consider those recordings as being before the board. And if you have an explanation as to how we might be able to do that, I'm open to hearing from you.
Well, I agree
Mr.
100%
Chairman.
with you, Colin. Again, it could be people who are no longer on the alderman or whatever, so I have difficulty. I understand what you're saying, but I have difficulty dealing with some information that I have no idea who said what, when. So let me take about 5-10 minute break. We've been at it now for about an hour and 15 minutes, so can we take a little recess?
Prior to your break, sir,
Yes.
could the board consider this as a point of order that we would vote on as a board prior to the break?
Good point. Good. Here is, the point is being made between the attorneys, the three of them, that there's information that's being said that's pertinent to their side. Somebody else is saying it's not pertinent, and our side saying we don't know what it is, okay? What Harley is suggesting is that we vote, make a motion that the point that the attorney for the complainant is that information is necessary for us to hear, or it's not necessary for us to hear because of it's not relative what we're trying to do. Okay, is that correct, Harley?
Mr. Chairman, just to make things a little bit easier, what I think we should do is we should take under consideration the positions of both counsel for the city as well as counsel for the marina. It'll be up to the board to determine the weight and sufficiency that they place upon the evidence before them. I think we've made some points as to some of the deficiencies or some of the issues that the board may take with the evidence that's being presented. I don't think there's any reason for the board to have to vote on it. I think we'll move forward and take under consideration the points that have been made by counsel as we consider the evidence before us. Agreed. I don't disagree with you. I think that the board's going to have to weigh that.
Lisa?
That was before my involvement in the case, I'll be honest with you. So I'm assuming that it was, but the structure of that and deliberations and just discussions? I mean, yeah, I have no, I assume that it was, but I mean, again, not having the transcript, not having, I don't know enough information to even ask your question, Ms. Fosbury. I don't know.
I can respond briefly, if I may. The UDO workshop records are now available through the City of Southport's website, which makes it somewhat remarkable that they don't want them to be available for your consideration, but that is what it is. The records, some of those workshop meetings include prior notice to the public that the meetings were going to be held, and for some of the early meetings, there was no prior notice that the meetings were going to be held.
To Mr. Frank's position here, the question to us is what the alderman may have said or what the planning department said about the UDO, and whatever casual conversation they may have had, whatever motions, if there were any, which I don't know, if there were any motions, I don't know how they could make a motion on something to this effect. Would us hearing that information be considered evidence in the appeal? Do we feel that way?
Mr. Chairman, I keep getting hung up on the fact that I thought, again, we're always hammering the facts.
Yeah.
The fact of the matter is, our job is to determine whether we agree with the decisions made based on the existing UDO approved at the time. What someone wanted to be different that in a verbal meeting, in a workshop, or whatever, I really don't see the relevancy, and that's just my opinion. So.
Well, for the record, with the fact that we have the attorneys here, I think that we need to go on record to the point, Hardy's point, just saying this is not relative to the evidence and facts that we need to make that decision. Okay? So, if that's the case, Hardy, okay? I want you to make the motion since you brought it up.
I would move then that the current testimony referring to discussions at a meeting, which is not available to be heard at this time, that be eliminated from further testimony with the board's consideration of the current issue.
Yeah, I think you want to be as accurate as possible as to what you're referring to. So to the extent that I would say the UDO workshop and just say.
Could I get the date from you?
Well,
You used a date of the workshop.
I did, and the workshop that was third, but in fairness, our original request was that all of the recordings maintained by the city be entered into the record, and so I suppose that's the question before you.
Well, that's outside the scope of what I was.
Again, I would caution the board about needing to move forward with a motion to determine at this time the sufficiency of that evidence. I think that it's well within the board's control and purview to determine that from a sufficiency and a weight standpoint that you do not place a great deal of weight on that evidence due to and based upon some of the issues that we've now discussed, probably longer than we need to. I would recommend that we move forward, and during the discussion purposes, when you have hopefully a very productive discussion about what evidence you believe to give weight to, that you determine at that point whether or not you'd like to move forward with putting any type of great concern about whether or not to consider that in your decision.
Okay, so we're making a decision, as far as I'm concerned, is that we're moving forward with our decision based on what we are hearing now, not what's in the past except for documentation from the city and documentation from you from exhibit standpoint. Testimony, exhibits, and documentation, okay?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
That's not what I heard.
If we can get back to our seats, please. All right, is everyone in place? I've been asked by those who are streaming this and recording it, reminding everyone to keep their microphones off and unless they're speaking, okay, because it creates problems with the system, okay? All right, we were still with you and
Yes, sir.
okay.
I'd like to ask Mr. Rose a few more questions, if I may.
Sure.
From a timeline perspective, he's just recently explained that he became aware that the plan submitted to the city had been blasted out on social media in late April. And Mr. Rose, what I'd like to give the board an opportunity to hear you talk about is the events that transpired over the next couple months. So you had a report from Mr. Whitley that the city had signed off on your expansion project, and you were aware of some significant social media activity. Tell us what happened next.
You said signed off. You're saying figuratively or literally?
Figuratively.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Could you repeat the question again, Mr. Frank? I'm sorry, I was trying to follow the question, but you're asking about social media communications by townspeople?
No, Mr. Rose has already testified that someone posted the plan that he provided to the city on social media in late April, and I asked him to talk to us about his experience thereafter.
Is that relevant to the interpretation of the ordinance under the UDO? I mean, I'm sorry, and I don't mean to be obstructionist, and maybe I'll let him start to testify and see. I just don't see how reaction to social media posts is relevant to
Okay.
these issues.
All right, let me pick that one up. Okay. I had said at the beginning of this thing, we don't use public opinion or anything to that effect in our decisions, only evidence and documentations and facts and what have you. Anything on social media would not be evidence to us in making our decision, okay? So, again, regardless of who said what on social media about the plans or whatever, has nothing to do with us, okay?
And just to be clear, I'm not asking Mr. Rose about the social media post. I was just providing a time post
Okay.
coming out of a recess so that we could pick up the story in the
Okay.
appropriate place.
Okay.
Ready?
Mr. Rose, did you have any reason to believe that the city was going to change its position regarding your compliance with the open space district regulations in your expansion?
No. This social media, rumors, whatever you want to call it, that led us to the planning board. That's what led us to the planning board. So you call it rumor, whatever you want to call it, that led us to start monitoring the planning board to find out what was going on. So when we did, we've got time, we got dates, we got every of them guiding that board into targeting our marina. They didn't say Southport Marina, but they said boat lifts, boat slips, and docks. The only places that's happening is our marina.
And in response to those concerns, did you communicate with the city?
I was concerned about what was going on. Before then, I thought all the hubbub was about the riparian buffer. Not till we started hearing rumblings that we were getting targeted, did we look into it? I thought any problem we had with the city was with the repair and burn that we were trying to work through with them.
And what was your response to those rumblings, as you called them?
Objection, I mean, I just don't see how this has any relevance to the issue before the board. What the response was to a social media rumbling, I'm sorry, I apologize to keep objection. I don't mean to, but I'm trying to get this hearing moving on so we can get to what is relevant to the issue.
The
I agree.
discussions,
I agree. I mean, again, we're dealing with your appeal and us trying to understand your appeal, okay? I don't
Absolutely.
think this has anything, social media rumblings, hearsay, whatever, that's not going to change us in making our decisions here, so.
I'm just telling you what led me to that.
in February, the city gave an unequivocal statement, verbal statement, to my client regarding their interpretation of this.
We object to that. That is not part of the evidence of this record. An unequivocal statement about open space. The only evidence in this record is that the district was never mentioned in February in response to a cross-examination question. So I'd object to the evidence being mischaracterized by Mr. Frank. That was not evidence in this record. No one has said that at this hearing.
I'm not sure a lawyer has ever objected to my response to their objection while I was responding to it before.
Well, I'm not going to let you
A new event.
mischaracterize the evidence before this board.
This is absolutely relevant. The discussion between the Southport Marina and the city regarding the city's interpretation of its own zoning code is relevant. The details of their dialogue in the months between February and July 31st is relevant. That is what this line of questioning is about. Of course, I will respect the direction of the chairman with regard to what you want to hear and what you don't.
The situation is, if I had something in writing, and if we had that person who said something here as a witness to that effect, then we could take that as testimony. But we cannot take your testimony about what somebody said as information or evidence or facts to us, okay? So if that person who said something, at least we would consider that, but is that person here?
Mr. Chairman, I'm asking Mr. Rose to talk about what he said to the city and what the city said as an admission of a party opponent, specifically about their meeting in July to discuss this matter.
Again, hearsay. We have this hearsay issue that, again, somebody has said something to someone about a situation. We cannot take that in much consideration in making our decision about how we got to your appeal, okay? You're appealing Lloyd's decision, okay? That's what we're working with, not somebody who said something that moved you along further in your CAMA and other investigations, okay? I understand what you're trying to do, but we're not dealing with that. I'm sorry.
That's not the point I'm making. The point I'm making is on record. It's in the planning board records and on planning board audio. You can hear it. That's the point I'm making. Forget how we got there through whatever we saw.
All right.
That's record.
All right.
Let me
Let me just say this. Just say what they said to planning board right now, and we'll at least consider what was said. At least we'll say, get that out front, okay? So what was said at the planning board that you're making your point on?
So I don't think we're talking about the planning board now, which,
I thought you just said planning board, it's on record.
let me make this easier, if I may.
Okay.
Mr. Rose, did you meet with the mayor and the city manager on July 2nd to talk about your expansion project?
Yes, we did. I reached out to the mayor, and he instructed me to reach out to the city manager because he was tied up in COVID, understandably. I was having a hard time getting a meeting between the parties, so I called you and asked you, could you call the city manager and set that meeting up?
What was, from your perspective, what was the purpose of that meeting?
We were concerned that they were moving the UDO change along and it would capture us in it. We wanted to stay under the current UDO.
And at that meeting, did you offer to the city the possibility of changing your plans for the expansion if they felt it necessary?
I did. We talked about several things that we would consider doing, but that really went nowhere. So our next question is how do we keep our submittal under the current UDO, because we felt like they were pushing along for a vote for the new UDO, which crushed our rights. And they told us to file a zoning compliance application. That's how you get that done. And we left the meeting, figured that we go file that zoning compliance application, we can move forward. Then 3 or 4, I don't know how many days it was, weeks later, maybe a week later, I don't know, Thomas sent an email out, and so I believe I got one from the town manager as well, that had full denial on it.
And prior to, or shortly after, the city responded to that application that they asked you to file, did the city respond to your offer to hear their comments and compromise? Did the city respond to your request to understand what they would like you to change about your plans?
I don't think, not in that meeting, the one that we had over at the other building. I don't think so in that meeting, no.
Well, tell us if they ever did.
Go ahead, I'm sorry.
Tell us if they ever did.
They listened to what I had to say, and they had to go back, and we want to talk about moving forward. You're talking about after the hurricane?
You can tell us that. Please
Okay.
do. Please tell the board about that.
After the hurricane on July the 3rd, I think it was the morning of July the 3rd, you know, I mean, no question about what we were going through there. 8 days later, Mr. Hargrove and the mayor showed up at the marina to check on us. And we went through, had a real pleasant meeting. I told them how happy we were and proud we were that Todd and his group was there to help us secure the perimeter, how the city maintenance crew was there to help us with barricades. I mean, it was just compliment after compliment. We couldn't ask for more, and they offered up anything else we can do for you, please let us know. So after we came off the porch at looking at the devastation that we had and the progress that we made, feeling pretty beat up by what happened to us, I asked them to come in the office again, and I sat down and I opened the camera submittal that you have there on your 8.5 by 11. I said, look, we understand, now. I mean, we're at our lowest point. We're getting ready to go to battle here at the Board of Adjustments. What I would propose to you today is take a look at this thing, and we would remove everything on the yacht base. And we made a substantial reduction in it. We'll move all that on the yacht basin side over here. All we're really asking for right now is those 33 docks. We can get those 33 docks. We ain't got to get in front of the board and waste your time and pay for his time and pay for his time. And I'm sorry, just the way it is. We could have avoided every bit of this. And I think this is just my take. Gordon took the map. Sorry, Mr. Hargrave took the map. He looked at it. He said, well, let me see if I understand this right. You mean you're going to remove all these docks and all these slips from the marina here? And I said, yes. We understand the line. Nobody wants to see it from the restaurant quarter, which is where the heat was coming from, and we removed all those boat lifts on that side as well. You can't even see those 33 slips from the restaurant quarter, and that's what we'll do. He then said, let me take that back and let me talk to each individual alderman and see what they say about that. But he felt like it was a good offer. I don't know, 2, 3 days later, 4 days later, he called up and said he didn't get any positive yes from none of the aldermen, not one. And therefore, we'd have to move forward with what we were going to do.
Thank you. I don't have any further questions for Mr. Rose. If someone from the board or the city does, please do.
On that map, sir, it's to your left. Yes, sir. That's all I asked for. On the left, bottom left. It's over here.
continue that? Okay.
No, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I have a few questions. Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Rose, you said you had filed your CAMA permit on or about March 11th, is that right?
I think in that range. I
It
know it
was
was delivered on the 16th. I've got it.
And it was
Registered receipt.
delivered to the town on March 16th, that's correct. And you acknowledged that March 13th was when the public health concerns of COVID-19 were first made aware, and the ACC tournament was canceled that day on March 13th. Is that correct?
I'm not sure about that. I know March the 17th is when I know things got shut down in our neck of the woods. I really don't know about 13th here in ACC tournament.
Yeah. And then March 27th was when the governor issued the order, stay-at-home order, and that people started working from home later in March. Is that correct? March 27th was Executive Order 121.
I would think, all I know is our world shut down on the 17th of March.
Yeah. So, but subject to check, in late March, pretty much people started working from home. Is that correct? Okay. You understand that a CAMA permit requires a certificate of zoning consistency from the local jurisdiction? Is that your understanding?
I think, yeah.
Okay. So you knew CAMA would ask the local jurisdiction whether or not it was consistent with the zoning?
Sure.
Okay. And CAMA has in fact asked Southport whether it's consistent or not?
I'm not real sure. I'd never even crossed my mind, because we were able to do it from day one. It never even crossed my mind.
Understand that was your understanding, but as we stand here today, has the city ever provided to you a document, a letter, an email stating what was or was not allowed in the open space area of this Southport Marina property?
Yeah, after the fact. Thomas sent one, and I think Gordon sent me a letter. I don't know if it was he sent me an email.
So,
it was on letterhead.
So the July 23rd letter from Mr. Hargrove and the July 27th letter from Mr. Lloyd are the only documents you've received about the open space district, to your knowledge?
I don't know if one was delivered to the Marine or not. I'm really not sure.
But I'm just asking your knowledge. You don't know of any other than
No,
that?
I know I got one from, I'm just about sure,
And-
but I know I got one from Thomas.
And prior to July 27th application that Mr. Frank filed, the Southport Marina had never filed for a permit for zoning consistency with the town prior to the July 27th application. Is that correct?
Never were asked to or never told we had to.
No, I was just, did you ever file an application prior to July 27th?
Only when they told us that was how to keep us under the old UDO.
So the answer is no. You had not before that time
No.
ever filed?
Nope.
No further questions. Thank you.
Just a brief question on redirect, if I may. Mr. Rose, in all the years that you planned this marina expansion, why didn't you previously ask the city to put something in writing to tell you that you were allowed to do this under the open space district regs?
I guess we took the word of the city, took the word of the people who work for the city. I mean, that would have been nice having a yeah, but when you go sit down, this is a small town. And when you go sit down with people and they tell you they're gonna do something, you expect for them to do what they say they're gonna do. And that's the way we've always tried to be here. If we tell you we're gonna do something, I promise you, we're gonna do it. And you can hold me to the letter of law on that. If we tell you we're gonna do something, we're gonna do it.
Thank you. I don't have anything further.
Thank you for your testimony. Board have any questions before I'm sorry. Mr. Robin, would you stand up there in case the board has some questions, please? I forgot. All right. Board, any questions for Mr. Robin?
What I was asking Mr. Whitley is, I know we got this plan here, and then is this the final plan of what Southport Marina intends to do? Or, I mean, I guess there's a lot of stuff going on, so is...
Well, as you know, we have a dry storage building that's been
Right.
approved that we're getting ready to try to build.
Right.
Other than that, I think that maxes out the property, what you see right there.
Are you going to put around the yacht basin corner, is there any proposal to put lifts there?
No lifts there.
And so, what's the estimate of how many additional boats will be stored there?
Whether it be stored or side tied to go to restaurants, it'd be one or two. Somebody could stop there for the day. I mean,
Are those rental?
Yeah, they can be, or they can be side tie.
Okay, so under this plan, it looks like another 30 or 40 boats,
I don't think
slips
that-
could be there?
How many was it, Hank? We had, sorry.
I mean, you don't have to be exact, but there's a significant number
I
of
don't
boats
think
could
it'd be, I don't
be
think
around
it-
there.
I really don't think it'd be 30, but I mean, you put,
How about the plans for your opening in between? You know, I mean, it looks like,
okay, where?
all in here too. All in here. See that? I know this. I mean, is there any plans for any boat dockage here? Boat dockage here? Okay. That's good for me. I just don't know what it means to what we're talking about. I just, yeah.
Yeah, I knew what he was talking about. Yeah. All right, Harley?
Somewhere in our package, I read that strip along the yacht basin there would be parallel tie-in. Tie?
Yeah, side tie. There'll be no lifts, there'll be no slips. It's a side tie.
But it is still a storage of boats. True?
It could be, or it could be for side ties, for people who want to come into town and go to the restaurants.
It's a description of the type of facility, not how it's operated. Tie-tie?
I say, I really lost
Just
it.
tie-tie, not a description of the facility as opposed to how it's operated.
Yeah, I guess. I mean, if somebody wants to come in and put their boat there and go to, we'll have an attendant out there that'll be watching that and be charged per foot.
And under your current plans, is that to be a charge or is that to be a free?
No, that would be a charge per foot.
Okay, thank you.
I got it, Mr. Chairman.
6 foot.
In looking at the information we were sent in our package, under the classifications and the permitted uses,
Yep.
it very clearly to me, it says in one area, and I'll read it, it says dry storage, boats, watercraft, and recreational vehicles, and there's no allowance. There's no allowance in the open space designation under the UDO that I'm reading here. Then on another page, it says marinas, commercial, including dry storage. And it has no permitted allowance under the open space in these documents they gave us. And that's where my confusion lies. If it's not permitted in the UDO as the document that I received that the city is operating under it, I don't understand the confusion. What does that say to you, those two areas?
What it says to me is that we've always been told that if it's for recreational use, it would be permitted in the open space.
Okay.
From day one.
Right.
And that's what that means to me.
And do you have
I
any
don't-
documentation or for that, with that?
Have I got documentation?
Yeah, I mean, beyond,
Didn't really think we
and we
needed
deal with facts, I think,
Yeah.
you know, and evidence, and, you know, that's, I guess, what I was looking for. Pardon?
Mr. Hayslip?
Yes.
May I respond as well to your question?
Yes, sir.
On page 3 of the presentation package that we submitted earlier is a satellite image of what we call the rec dock at the Southport Marina. On page 4 is the certificate of occupancy issued by the city regarding the
Right.
same.
Right.
The use of that dock is in the open space district and is identical to the use that you're describing.
Say that again.
The use of that dock is in the open space district and is identical to the use that you're describing with side tie boat
Right.
slips that pay from time to time.
Right.
On the board. Okay. I think we're through. Thank you. Are we ready to move into the city?
Yes, I would ask Mr. Thomas Floyd to the witness stand. We're going to try to keep this as brief as possible, given the late hour. Mr. Tarrant will explain that I just need to get documents into the record, and I'm going to try to do that with Mr. Floyd. We'll talk a little bit about sequence to the extent that there needs to be some rebuttal to what's been said, but I'm going to try to keep it brief, and then we'll have closing arguments and wrap it up. So I don't want to linger this out, but I'm going to, if Mr. McGee will let me stand up next to him, I'm going to go back up next to him so we can get some documents into the record.
We're already sworn in? All right.
Yeah, walking from back and forth. So, Mr. McGee, you okay with me asking questions from this location, and I'll try to, because we'll start without some documents. I do want you to state your name and address and title and information about, because we need to establish a record on appeal. Even though they all know you very well, we need to establish that for the record, Mr. Lloyd.
Sure. My name is James Thomas Lloyd, and I work I'm the city planner for the city of Southport. Our place of business address is 1029 North Howe Street, and that is Southport, North Carolina, 28461.
And what's your position there with the city of Southport?
City planner.
What's your because we need to establish a record, what's your educational background qualifications as city planner, Mr. Lloyd?
Sure. I got my Bachelor of Arts from North Carolina State University, and I graduated in May of 2014, and that is with political science and a concentration of public policy. Following graduation, I then got my Master's of Public Administration at NC State University, and that is, as I said before, a Master of Public Administration.
Okay. Have you received any specialized training specifically regarding being a zoning administrator?
Yes, I have. I have taken many courses at the UNC School of Government, including Introduction to Planning and Development Regulation, zoning practice, and then the zoning official course, as well as the subdivision practice course. And I am also a certified zoning official, and that is a partnership course that is done between the UNC School of Government and the North Carolina Association of Zoning Officials. And in order to qualify for that, you have to take all 3 courses that I mentioned earlier that relate to zoning, and then you also have to pass a written exam. And also, as a part of that, you have to take continuous education credits every year. And I received that in April of 2019. And I'm also a certified floodplain manager, and that is managed by the North Carolina Association of Floodplain Managers. And in order to get that, you also have to take a 4-day class from FEMA on the National Flood Insurance Program, and then there's a written exam on the 5th day.
Let me hand you what's been marked as Exhibit 12. I want to get into evidence and ask you to identify what that is, and Ms. Terrazas will pass that out.
Yes, this is the city planner job description for the city of Southport that was adopted by the board in 2017.
And this is your job description for your work for the city of Southport?
Correct.
And what's the first line under your essential duties and tasks?
Develops and administers zoning ordinances.
Now, the city ordinance has a provision 3-16 I'll hand to you what's been marked as Exhibit 13 and ask if you will identify what that is and what's highlighted on that page.
Sure. So this is saying who is the administrator, and it says that except as otherwise specifically provided, primary responsibility for administering and enforcing this ordinance may be assigned by the city manager to one or more individuals. The person or persons to whom these functions are assigned shall be referred to this ordinance as the administrator.
Are you the administrator under Section 3-16 for the city of Southport?
I am.
Have you been in that position since you were hired in 2017?
Yes.
Is there any other person who has been the administrator for the zoning code since 2017?
Not while I've been here.
So you're the one person who has the authority to provide zoning interpretations for the city of Southport. Is that correct?
Yes.
So let me talk a little bit, to the extent there has been evidence presented about the February 22nd meeting, and it's been stated that you were at that meeting. Can you tell us a little bit about that February 22nd meeting, and be very brief if you would?
Yes, there was a meeting on February 22nd between Hank, Wayne, and myself, and there was a sketch that was shown, as Hank said, and I recall talking about whether or not it was a planning board approval, and then also what the parking requirements would be. And for dry storage, it's one space per, one space for every 4 slips, and then for wet slips, it's 1 for 1. So we did discuss that. I do not recall going over the zoning district or having a zoning map at the meeting and comparing the zoning map to the site plan.
Mr. Lloyd, would you remove your mask, please?
Sure.
Okay, thanks.
So let me circle back with you. At that February 22nd meeting, and I think the witness earlier for the Marinas said the same thing, was there any discussion of the zoning districts for the Marina during that meeting?
There was not.
Did you say anything about the zoning compliance with the zoning districts at that meeting?
Not at that meeting.
Was there any discussion by anybody about zoning compliance at that February 22nd meeting?
Not that I recall.
So let's move forward. There was a CAMA permit submitted, is that correct?
That's correct.
What happened next?
So I believe the CAMA permit was submitted on March 11th. We have record that it reached our office on March 16th. As you said earlier, the governor had, issued a stay-at-home order on March 13th. So we were, some of us in the city were working at home, those who had pre-existing health conditions. We then, I believe as soon as the city manager saw the application, which I believe was on April 21st, we met and we discussed it, and we found that it did not, or was not consistent with the zoning ordinance and the zoning map.
Did you have any discussion with the city manager prior to you and he looking at it on April 21st?
We did not.
Okay. Let me hand you what's been marked Exhibit 14. What time of day did you meet with the city manager on the 14th, if you remember, to talk about the CAMA application?
I do not recall the exact time.
So what is Exhibit number 14 that I've handed you, that's been marked for identification I've handed you?
It's an email from the interim city manager to the Division of Coastal Management.
So this was shortly after you and he talked for the first time about the application?
That's correct.
And what did the city manager, on the day that you first looked at the application, communicate to the North Carolina Department of Natural Resources?
Yes, he mentioned that it is zoned open space, which expressly prohibits marinas and docks.
So after that was communicated in April, obviously we're still under the COVID-19 circumstances. With regards to the Marinas expansion plans, what's your next recollection of any involvement in this, on these issues?
The next thing I remember is that July 2nd meeting.
And what was discussed at the July 2nd meeting?
From what I remember, there was a lot of discussion about riparian, the riparian issue that Mr. Frank briefly touched on earlier.
And was there any statements made about consistency or with the open space or allowing the marina to expand into open space?
Yes, that it was not consistent.
Excuse me, I'm sorry.
Yes, that it was not consistent in the open space district.
Okay. And that was communicated in July 2nd?
Yes.
Okay. So let me hand you what will be marked Exhibit 15. And ask you, and I'm sorry there's not an exhibit sticker on this, but ask you to ask the board members to label this Exhibit 15 and tell us what this letter is.
Yes, that is a ordinance interpretation and determination, and
Well, I mean, so did this follow up the July 2nd meeting?
yes, this was sent on July 23rd.
Okay, before you received an application.
That's correct.
So do you know why this letter was sent on July 23rd? Was it to clarify and put in writing for the first time the city's position?
That's correct.
Is this the first writing that the city had ever sent to the city of Southport about the open space district, to your knowledge?
Yes, to my knowledge.
All right, after sending this letter on July 23rd, what happened next in the chronology of the events surrounding this?
Yes. Next, the marina, or their attorney, Sam Frank, on behalf of the marina, submitted a zoning compliance permit for the marina expansion. I believe that was on July 27th.
Is that the zoning compliance permit application that's part of the agenda packet to this board?
That is correct.
Okay. So after receiving that permit application, you are the administrator of the zoning code. You're responsible for administering the code. What did you undertake in response to receiving that application?
Yes, so anytime you have an application, a zoning application, you review it to see if it complies with the standards as set forth in the Unified Development Ordinance. So the things that you typically look at when you're doing that is you look at Article 2, which is the definitions, and then you also look at the table 10, which is the table of permitted uses. And if there's any supplemental standards for those permitted uses, you also pay attention to those. But you also compare it to the zoning map, and you see if it complies with what is consistent with the zoning map.
So we've already kind of admitted into evidence the zoning map out of order. But would you just summarize briefly, the zoning map that the board's already received as City Exhibits 10 and 11, and what it shows and what it means?
Yes, so the property is split zone between business district and open space. And what split zone means is that it has two different zoning designations on the same parcel. When you do have a property that is split zone, the zoning district standards that are applicable to each zoning district are applicable to where that zoning district is located. So anything in open space that's not permitted in open space, would not be allowed there. Anything that's permitted in business district would be allowed in the area that's zoned business district.
So you've talked about zoning districts, open space. Let me hand you a document that's been labeled Exhibit 16, and Mr. Razis will testify. And you were talking about districts. Would you explain to me what's been marked as for identification Exhibit number 16?
Yes, Exhibit 16 is from Article 9, Zoning Districts and Zoning Map, and it is Section 9-1, Establishment of Zoning Districts and Purpose thereof.
And so it's the zoning, these are the zoning districts that correspond with the colors on the zoning map.
That's correct.
Okay. And the issue before the board is what's allowed in the OS district. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm.
And is that the green district on the map?
That is correct. It is the green district.
Okay. I don't have a very fancy exhibit, but I do have that page of the exhibits that are handed out. And can you explain, Mr. Boyd, what the purpose and classification of the open space district is?
Yes, it is defined as areas of special public interest that should be placed in a zone protected from any development other than improvements or uses undertaken by the city of Southport.
So that's the purpose of the OS zoning district. That's the only one that would be there.
That is correct.
So, again, I don't have an easel to put this on, so I'm just going to lay it right here. We'll maybe refer refer to it. So once you have a zoning map and the zoning districts, then how do you apply to determine what is and is not allowed in a particular zoning district?
You look at the table of permitted uses.
Okay, and I think we're at Exhibit 17 at this point. So I would hand to you what's been marked as Exhibit 17 and ask that you describe what that exhibit is.
Yes, the table of permitted uses is it's all uses that are allowed or prohibited, in the city of Southport. So it lists all the uses, and it then lays out what zoning district they're allowed in, and whether they're permitted by right or whether they're conditional, or special use.
As the zoning administrator, do you have to classify the use to determine what row or what category on the permitted use table it fits under?
You do.
Okay. And do you look at definitions to determine what the use is classified as?
Yes, you look at Article 2 definitions in the Unified Development Ordinance.
And what definition did you look at to determine whether or what classification this use was?
Marina commercial,
And that's a defined term in the ordinance?
it is.
Okay. And I'd like to admit into evidence Exhibit 18, or mark it, Exhibit 18, and hand that to you, and Mr. Terrazas will distribute that. And I'll ask you what the definition of marine commercial is under the UDO.
It is any waterfront structure or development commercially providing temporary or permanent or temporary harboring or storing for 2 or more boats, pleasure and or commercial, and providing marina sales, including but not limited to retail sales for fuel, repairs, convenient foodstuffs, boats, engines, and accessories.
What facts did you consider, given your knowledge of the Southport Marina, in determining that the use fit under the definition of marina commercial?
Well, yeah, I mean, they have slips for rent there. They also have the marina sales such as fuel, repairs, foodstuffs, as well as accessories.
And our marinas commercial, what districts are they allowed in, or what does the permitted use table say about where the commercial marinas are allowed?
Yes, they're allowed in business district.
Okay. Are they allowed in the open space district?
No.
And that's what's shown on page 10-10 of Exhibit 17, previously marked and distributed to the board. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. Are there other commercial marinas in the city of Southport?
Yes, there are. There is Deep Point Marina, and is owned by Bald Head Island, and there is also Indigo.
Okay. What's the zoning for the Deep Point Marina?
Business district.
And what's the zoning for the Indigo Plantation Marina?
Planned unit development.
And are commercial marinas allowed in the business district and the planned unit development district that are applicable to the Deep Point Marina and the Indigo Plantation Marina?
Yes.
So all the other commercial marinas in Southport are properly zoned in districts where they're allowed?
That is correct.
To your knowledge, has Southport ever allowed something that it classified as marina commercial in an open space area?
Not to my knowledge.
So let me ask you, go back to the table of uses again. There's a column that doesn't correspond with any zoning district. It's this first column that has ICS at the very beginning of it. So let me ask you, what is that ICS column?
It is the North American Industry, I believe, classification system.
Okay. And what is the purpose of that column being on the permitted use
The purpose of it is to provide clarification on permitted uses in case there are ambiguous or unclear definitions.
Okay, I want to hand to you what's marked as Exhibit 19. And I'm sorry there's not an exhibit sticker on this, so I will ask the board or the clerk to label this as Exhibit 19. And ask if you, I'm sorry. Wait a minute. Yeah. And ask if you would describe what Exhibit 19 is.
Yes, it's a definition pulled from the NAICS code
For what use?
for marinas.
Okay. And would you read the definition under the NAICS code?
Yes, it says, this industry comprises establishments, commonly known as marinas, engaged in operating, docking, and/or storage facilities for pleasure craft owners, with or without one or more related activities, such as retailing fuel and marine supplies, and repairing, maintaining, or renting pleasure boats.
In your professional opinion as a zoning code administrator, is that the classification that that describes the Southport Marina?
Yes.
So we've had some discussion, and I'm going to go ahead and address it and get it in the record, of a use on the table of permitted uses for recreation areas, comma, municipal. That's on, I believe that is on a page of Exhibit 17 marked page 10 through 20. Is there an ICS code related to that use?
There is.
And what is that ICS code?
Give me one moment.
Page 10-12, under P.
Yes, it is 924120.
Let me hand you what's been marked as Exhibit 20 and have Ms. Terrazas distribute that. And let me ask you to describe what's been marked as Exhibit 20 as an exhibit in this case.
Yes, would you like the definition?
Yeah, what it is. What
Yes,
it is.
it
been
is.
handed to you.
It is the NAICS code 924120 pulled from their website.
Okay. And that pertains to describing what use?
Parks and recreational areas, municipal.
And how's that ICS code describe that use?
It says that this industry comprises government establishments primarily engaged in the administration, regulation, supervision, and control of land use, including recreational areas, conservation and preservation of natural resources, erosion control, geological survey program administration, weather forecasting program administration, and the administration and protection of publicly and privately owned forest lands. Government establishments responsible for planning, management, regulation, and conservation of game, fish, and wildlife populations, including wildlife management areas and field stations, and other administrative matters relating to the protection of fish, game, and wildlife are included in this industry.
In your professional opinion as a zoning code administrator, does that describe the Southport Marina?
No.
Okay. And therefore, you've determined that was not the proper classification for the Southport Marina?
That is correct.
So based upon that review of the purpose of the zoning districts, the allowed uses under the permitted use table, the definitions, and the NICS codes, what was your determination with regards to the zoning compliance permit filed on July 27th by Southport Marina?
That the proposed expansion is not consistent with the Unified Development Ordinance and zoning map.
So I will next mark as Exhibit 21, and I apologize. It's already in your packet. However, I think it would make the record clearer if it were also included. So therefore, I will hand you what's been marked as Exhibit 21 and ask if Mr. Razis would distribute that and have you identify what the exhibit, the mark 21 is.
Yes, this is the denial letter for the zoning compliance application, and it was sent on July 31st, 2020.
And that was based upon the analysis that you just described in your testimony.
That's correct.
Is there anything else, is there anything you've heard tonight at this hearing that would change your interpretation of the ordinance that the Southport Marina is a commercial, as a marina-commercial?
There's not.
If you were asked to render this decision again, would it still be the same?
Yes.
To your knowledge, has the city of Southport ever issued any zoning determination of any commercial marina inconsistent with what your determination was on July 31st?
No.
There has been testimony, however, and evidence that's been presented about docks located elsewhere in open space areas. Would you care to comment or have anything to say about the fact that the city has not prohibited or classified or have an enforcement action of those docks?
Yes, there are several residential docks, as they mentioned, that are in open space zoned areas, and to my knowledge, the city has never had any enforcement action or procedures against those docks for single-family residential docks.
Was there any use category in the permitted use table for personal use docks?
There was not.
So there just wasn't a use that was identified under the zoning ordinance?
That's correct.
Under the old UDO? Okay. So not having any classification for that use, there wasn't any regulations pertaining to those personal use docks?
That's correct.
I have no further questions at this time for this witness. I may have someone to redirect.
Cross-examination.
Yes, please. Mr. Lloyd, how do you do? In the city of Southport, if a tract of land is subject to multiple zoning districts, some uses allowed on some of the parcels, some uses allowed on another, do you require a physical barrier between those uses?
Not to my knowledge.
And your conclusion that the Southport Marina operation is a commercial marina under your zoning code, is that applicable to the entire operation of the Southport Marina?
Yes.
I assume as the UDO administrator that you're very familiar with the zoning map for the city.
I am.
Excuse me. When did you first hear of or learn that Southport Marina was considering expansion of its docks across the open space districts, the open space district portions of its property?
It would be the CAMA permit.
Can you clarify which CAMA permit?
Yes, the March 11th CAMA permit.
When did you say you started with the city?
I started in 2016.
2016.
Mm-hmm.
So in 2017 and 2018, when the city and Southport Marina were having significant discussions about cooperating to build a dock, did you participate in those discussions?
Some, but I wasn't involved in all the conversations.
Did you ever see a site plan at that time?
Yes, but that also was a governmental use with it being a city dock.
But the site plan that you saw showed Southport Marina's expansion alongside that government use, didn't it?
I never saw the full expansion. The only thing I saw was the city dock, and then I believe there were a certain number of slips adjacent to or next to the city dock that the marina was going to have as well.
Mm-hmm. So you were aware of some expansion in 2017 or 2018. It sounds like you're telling us it's something, a smaller piece of the picture than what you see today.
Yes.
Okay. At that time, being familiar with the zoning regulations and the zoning map, did you indicate to anybody at the city or Southport Marina that they would not be allowed to operate that dock?
I do not recall, no.
When did you first communicate to Southport Marina, verbally or in writing, that the current expansion plan was inconsistent with the open space district?
Our city manager communicated that to the Division of Coastal Management on April 21st.
I'm asking when you communicated that to Southport.
I am not sure when that was communicated.
We received your letter dated July 23rd on July 28th. And of course, we sent you a letter on July 27th. The reason those were both in play is because they passed in the mail. Are you aware of any communication to the Southport Marina prior to your letter dated July 23rd, 2020, where you communicated that their use was inconsistent with the open space district?
I'm not.
And you just testified a moment ago that the city manager said as much to CAMA in early April.
Yes.
With regard to the several other docks that are located in the open space district in the city of Southport, your testimony is that, let me make sure I understand this correctly, that the hair splitting is that if it's a personal dock adjacent to a residential property, then it's not a commercial marina and it's not defined in your code and therefore it's permitted. Do I understand that correctly?
That it hasn't been enforced in the past for residential docks,
Well,
historically.
and I appreciate your characterization because what the city chooses to enforce and how it chooses to enforce at the end of the day, that is the UDO. And with regard to your decision to enforce or not to enforce against the open space district docks that exist today, have you ever had cause to investigate any of them?
No.
I think that's the extent of my questions. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Lloyd.
Yes.
Any questions? Any questions from the board to Mr. Lloyd? Oh, I'm sorry.
Right, no.
Okay. Any questions from the board? Yes, Lisa.
Yes, Thomas, I was curious, when was this property that we're talking about designated as open space?
So I have researched historical zoning maps, and the one that I could find that was the earliest that had it on there was 1984.
Time the marina purchased the property, it was zoned as it is today.
Correct.
Right, Harvey.
That it included this part of the marina. I believe the date on that CO is 2008. Somehow I must have missed the significance. I do not see the open space that was included in that CO. Am I missing something?
I'm not sure what the question
There was
is.
reference made that this CO, which was issued in 2008, included open space.
You're looking at me, but talking to Mr. Lloyd. Do you want me to answer your question,
I
or
would
would you like to?
appreciate that being answered by anyone.
Okay. Would you like to answer first, or?
I-
Thank you. Question, the rec dock.
A second.
Sure.
I was going to say, Mr. Frank will have the opportunity to make a closing argument. We both will. If he wants to respond, I don't object, but, okay, that's fine. I'm sorry. Let's go ahead and keep this moving. If Mr. Franklin.
Maybe if I could
I
help.
would think members of the board could ask questions of anyone in the room anytime they see fit.
I agree. Go right ahead.
I think I'll help Harley out, because he helps me out all the time. Was this referenced, the CO, when they built that recreation dock, was that built on open space land? That's the question I think is out there.
Yes, it's
Is that
zoned,
right, Harley? Excuse me.
it is zoned open space.
It was on open space.
Was the parallel docking along the side, because I don't, that's the only place I can see it when I look back at that. So we did have a ruling back in 2008.
There was a CO, yes.
All right, thank you.
I have a question. So the current business district that the marina is now where it's located used to be an open space designation, is that correct? It
I mean-
was zoned the same as the property we're discussing, is that correct?
No, I mean, I know on the 1984 zoning map, the full, marina area, the part you're talking about was business district, and then there was portions that were open space.
So back like in 2014 or 13, the marina was located at business district zoning property.
Yes. And then there's the portions that were open space that have been since at least 1984. I don't know how much longer they were than that, but I found documentation from 1984.
This particular document in 2008, doesn't this talk about the structure being in compliance with construction? It's not talking about zoning or anything
Yes, it's more about the structural integrity of it and that it meets code requirements.
for the structure.
Yes.
Okay, that's my question. Thank you.
Comments?
Yes, Mr. Frank and I'll both be giving closing arguments. Do you want to go first, Mr. Frank, or you want me to?
If I could have just a minute, make a decision about one more witness. Bear with me just a second. Thank you, I appreciate that. Mr. Stiers, I'd be glad for you to give your closing argument first.
Let me say before closing arguments, there is someone who asked to speak. I don't know if the board wants to hear. It's not sponsored by the city, and so there is someone who is available to speak. In addition, I don't know if the board wants to hear from any other witnesses or not.
All right. As I had said in our opening comments, that any speakers or any public comment is not something we generally deal with evidence and facts. So whoever this person may be who wants to speak will swear you in, and you'll be dealing with facts and evidence to the board. You understand? Okay, whoever that is.
And I think he's going to speak as an expert, as into intent and purposes of ordinances. He's not a fact witness. So, Mr. Tarrant, you want to distinguish that?
Yeah, I'd just like to point out that, technically speaking, this board is not to consider, the testimony of lay persons, but to the extent that the witness would qualify as an expert, and I would suggest that the board ask certain questions in order to qualify the witness as an expert, then this board would be able to consider those opinions as expert testimony.
All right. We'll swear you in. Put your left hand in the Bible. Raise your right. You swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
State your name and address.
My name is Jordan Stenner, and my address is 508 West Brunswick.
Okay. Remove your mask, it'll be easier.
I'm sorry, say that again, sir?
Remove your mask.
I'd prefer to keep it on if that's okay. If you can't hear me clearly, I'll repeat it. So we pay taxes on one of the residential docks that was spoken of, which is right across the street, as well as the land. I am not an expert, but that's all I'm here to say, is that we pay taxes on the dock and the land across the street from our home, which is at 508 West Brunswick.
Okay.
I'm specifically here to speak on the issue of, first, thank you for this opportunity. And I'm going to read this to be brief. That way I won't get off onto a tangent. Again, my name is Andy Wood. I'm a resident of Hampstead. For quick background, I'm a community conservation consultant, but I've spent the last 35 plus years as a coastal ecologist in this area. I've given you the copy of my resume. In addition to that, which doesn't include, I was an appointed member of the Wilmington, New Hanover County Unified Development Ordinance Committee, working to update the 2006 Coastal Area Management Act. In that role, I represented environmental matters to be included in the UDO. This to state that I have considerable experience with the UDO process, including zoning ordinances and the application of intent and purpose as they apply to specific ordinances. I've reviewed the Southport Unified Development Ordinance, established under authority of general statute that extends to cities the authority to enact regulation compliance. And my testimony is being offered from a policy perspective with attention to the terms intent and purpose as they apply to specific ordinances. As stated in the UDO, the Southport UDO, open space districts are those areas of special public interest that should be placed in a zone protected from any development other than improvements or uses undertaken by the city of Southport, a municipality. While this statement is self-explanatory, I'll add the open space designations are determined for a variety of reasons that generally have to do with protecting community integrity, environmental quality, and public trust resources, especially land and water assets. These are the areas of public interest as defined by trained professional land use and community planners. Delineation of special public interest areas is not an arbitrary act. The process requires considerable research and study to ensure these places are of special value to a community's residents and visitors and defensibly worthy of being placed in a zone protected. The Southport UDO open space designation's purpose, the reason for which something is done or made, and intent, something planned, has everything to do with protecting the health and well-being of the people who benefit from ecosystem services provided by such places as tidal creeks and salt marshes, coastal swamp forests, and other habitats that clean our air and water while also protecting a community's inherent natural heritage. As a coastal ecologist, with more than 3 decades of experience in land use planning issues and natural resource conservation, I'm confident that allowing the Southport Marina to construct piers and docks into the open space district involved in this hearing would violate the purpose and intent of the ordinance established by the City of Southport and memorialized in the Southport UDO. This to say, I concur with Mr. Lloyd's and the Planning Department's decision and finding. Thank you very much.
Would you like to question the witness?
Sir, thank you.
I have no questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
just to clarify the significance of paying taxes on the land across the street and the dock is in the proposed blueprint. That is the entryway, the new entryway to the 86 slips. So if you were to look at the proposed blueprints here, the entryway to the new slips is across the street at the dock on the property that we own and pay taxes on. Thank you. Do you have any questions for that?
I don't think so. no.
Okay.
Oh, I'm sorry. Forgive me just a minute.
Say that again. I'm not sure who the previous owner was. That's it. Yes, sir.
I'm sorry, I do have a brief question. Do you claim fee simple title ownership to the tract of land across the street?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that?
Do you claim that you have fee simple title ownership of the land across the street?
Yes.
Do you have a deed to that effect or something to offer to this board to substantiate that claim?
I could provide that after the fact. I'm here as representing my mother and my father, Jennifer Stinner and Jack Stinner, who did not want to come due to COVID-19 related issues.
Okay, so no.
Concerns.
Understood.
No,
Thank you.
I can provide it after the fact or send it to the board members. There would be no problem with that.
That's their territory.
Okay.
Yeah.
Would the board like a title or
Not at this time, thank you.
a tax receipt? Yes, sir. I'm saying we pay taxes on the dock as well as the land across the street. And the previous owner had built the dock, and we purchased this in 2019 or 2018.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Okay.
I'm very aware of the late hour and everyone's tired, so I will try to be very brief. As I said at the very beginning of this hearing, and I want to say it again here at the very end, this is a very simple question as to whether Thomas Lloyd did or did not properly interpret the Southport ordinance at the time that the zoning application, consistency application was filed. It is not whether the marina should be allowed to build into the open space. That's not something you need to worry yourselves about, but you're probably glad to hear. It's also not whether the marina should be allowed to extend into open space. That's actually not a Board of Adjustment decision either, and I'll get to that at the very end. It's not whether or how the permitted use table should read and what uses should be allowed in some districts or not. None of that is before you today. So you've heard a lot of evidence, you've heard a lot of history. I'm sorry you've had to go through all that, but that's really not, and that's why I kept objecting, because that's not the issue before you today. In deciding whether the zoning ordinance is properly interpreted, there are some very basic principles to follow. Some of you may or may not, or maybe just us law geeks, have David Owen's book on land use regulation. But the land use law, there's a section that talks about the interpretation of ordinances by boards of adjustment, a section that talks specifically about what you're asked to do tonight in this type of hearing. And it says there that the principal consideration and interpretation is to give effect to the intent of the board that enacted the provision, considering the purpose of the ordinance and problems it attempts to address. And in this case, you don't have to guess about the purpose. The purpose is stated in section 9.1 that says that, and it's one of the enlargements there that maybe Mr. Razis will turn that board around. The purpose is for areas of special public interest that should be placed in a zone protected from any development other than the improvements or uses undertaken by the city of Southport. So you don't have to guess at the purpose. There's all this evidence about intent and purpose. It's in the black and white letters that the purpose is to prevent any to protect it from any development whatsoever other than that by the city of Southport. Another principle in Mr. Owen's book is where clear, plain, and unambiguous language is used, it controls. When the ordinance specifically defines a term, that specified meaning must be applied. And here you have a specific ordinance, a definition, the definition of commercial marina. So you don't have to worry about how to define a commercial marina. You turn that around, Mr. Reza. It's already in the ordinance. And you've already heard testimony that the marina is where, again, you have the two or more boats and providing marine sales, including but not limited to retail sales for fuels, repairs, convenient foodstuffs, boats, engines, and accessories. So the information I solicited was to demonstrate that this use meets all the criteria of the defined term, and the defined term is in fact what you as the Board of Adjustment are to follow. Also, where clear, plain, and unambiguous language is used, it controls. The common and ordinary meanings of non-technical words apply. All terms within a provision and all provisions within an ordinance, so you have to read them together, must be considered, and all should be considered as a whole. You can't pick and choose. You've got to look at the entire intent, and you've got to look at all the provisions, the permitted use table, the definitions of the uses and the districts, and you apply them all together. Now, while the marina has a right to appeal Mr. Lloyd's application of the ordinance, quite frankly, this isn't the right arena and place to argue that the marina should be allowed or not allowed in the open space district. The policy question is not for the Board of Adjustment to consider. I appreciate Mr. Hayslip's questions about, well, where's the 33 slips versus the 86 slips? I appreciate that question, but as a practical matter, that's really not subject to the Board of Adjustment determination, because in fact, if a commercial marina is allowed to extend into the open space, it's all or nothing. I mean, and quite frankly, the idea that somehow some slips that are for dockage and that will be paid rates are not commercial and are not part of a commercial marina, and others are. Quite frankly, you can't unscramble that egg. It's all connected. It's all the same piers. It's all the same entrance. It's all the same marina. And they're going to charge rents for all the slips. So to try to somehow differentiate between, well, those docks doesn't include, aren't part of the marina, that just is not consistent with your understanding of how a marina operates. It should not be before you tonight. The proper way to make this argument that they've made tonight is to make that to the Board of Aldermen in the context of a rezoning application. It happens very commonly. Several times every year, a landowner will ask for a property to be rezoned because they think there's another zoning classification that is more appropriate. Several times every year, there's a landowner who asks for property to be rezoned. If the marina doesn't like the OS zoning, the open space zoning, they can ask for it to be rezoned. Likewise, another alternative they have is to apply for a text amendment to add marinas in the open space, and that's another avenue they have. And in fact, if you agree tonight that Mr. Lloyd was correct in his interpretation, looking at the words of the ordinance, they still have that right. And that's the proper avenue to make the arguments they've made tonight And it's really the Board of Aldermen to make that policy decision. Not to try to get you to twist the words in the ordinance beyond recognition, quite frankly, to try to interpret them in some type of Rube Goldberg interpretation that doesn't flow from what the words are on the paper. So the policy decision is not for you to make tonight. You don't have to make that decision. It is simply whether or not, as I said in my very first remarks, Mr. Lloyd was correct in his interpretation of the ordinance. The evidence, as I said, is whether or not Mr. Lloyd classified the use properly. Whether he looked at the proper provisions of the ordinance, whether he looked at the proper characteristics of the use, whether he classified the use correctly, and whether he read the ordinance correctly. That's the question before you tonight, and the evidence in the exhibits that I have submitted. And Mr. President, how many exhibits have we presented? 21. So I guess at this point I need to make sure I've labeled those exhibits. I would ask this board to accept into evidence the 21 exhibits that have been previously marked and presented to you, so that would be part of the record in this case. Okay, so they will be accepted? Okay. So, finally, I'll make a few final points. There was discussion of whether there was a deal to be made regarding the riparian rights of the city dock. Did you hear that? You can't make a deal that violates the ordinance. You can't make a deal that interprets the ordinance in a way that isn't supported. It's Mr. Lloyd's responsibility to ensure that the ordinance is interpreted correctly. If you cut a deal that says, well, if you don't interpret the ordinance a certain way, well, we'll give you the riparian rights you're requesting, that's called contract zoning. It's a quid pro quo. It's illegal. It's improper. You probably know that already. That's not something that is allowed. It's not something that Mr. Lloyd would allow to happen. And quite frankly, the Board of Aldermen does not have the authority to cut deals about zoning interpretation. We're not here to evaluate, whether this is a good use or a bad use. It's a right zoning classification or not right zoning classification. I said at the very beginning, we admire the work that the Marinas is doing. We value their contribution to our community. We're not critical of what they're doing. But the law has to be applied consistently to everyone. You can't make special exceptions. You've got to follow the rule of law for everyone, no matter how big, how small, how powerful, how weak, and it's got to be applied consistently. And in this case, to give the words their real meaning, to interpret them the way they were intended, to not try to twist them in some way that makes no sense, and to apply them the same way to everyone who comes before you, you will have to and should, and we ask that you affirm the interpretation of Mr. Lloyd. It may not seem fair, but it's supported. And by some, it may not be, but it's supported, and it's the proper interpretation of the ordinance. And I thank you for your consideration and your listening this evening.
Mr. Frank?
Good evening. Just a quick point of clarification before I enter my argument. The gentleman who spoke earlier about that tract of land, that's a piece of land that's owned by the Southport Marina and has been for some time. It used to be subject to an easement that allowed others to have a dock on it. That easement expired when the prior owner sold the property. I have no idea why he's paying the taxes on it, but we'll talk with him about that after this hearing and get the tax component of that straight. Mr. Stiers is exactly right. The question before you tonight is whether or not the determination by the city was the correct one. We contend, of course, that Mr. Lloyd's determination was not correct. Mr. Stiers' argument assumes that it was and tells you that therefore there's no reason for you to further consider the question. As you might imagine, I very specifically disagree with that. When you look at the way that Mr. Lloyd interpreted the ordinance, you have to consider the city's prior course of conduct and prior interpretation of that ordinance. The city wants you to believe that the history is irrelevant because it's not conducive to their new interpretation. But I assure you that it is. My client had every good reason and right to rely on not only the course of conduct, but the representations that the city made to them. When Mr. Whitley with the Marina met with the city in February of 2020 to discuss a pre-con, what do we need to do to get this project done? There was no recommendation whatsoever that the zoning code needed to be revised in order to allow the use. The city's known since 2017 that Southport Marina planned to expand its use over the open space district. If they had told Southport Marina in 2017 or 2018, February of 2020, maybe even in April of 2020 when they flagged it to CAMA, that this was a use that was inconsistent with the zoning code, we wouldn't be here tonight. The reason we're here tonight is because over a consistent course of conduct, the city has demonstrated and explained to my client that they were permitted to put recreational docks in the open space district, recreational docks including those that they might rent to others. The 2008 approval, the certificate of occupancy, asks exactly the same question that CAMA's asking. Does the building comply with the regulations applicable to structure and use in the city's code? The city's affirmation that the rec dock at the Southport Marina in 2008 was consistent with the zoning code applicable to the open space district was not only correct, but it was also not remarkable. It was exactly consistent with the way that the city has always interpreted the open space district, right up until July 23rd, 2020. Southport Marina did the right thing. They consulted with the city, verified that their plans were acceptable, and jumped at the opportunity to help the city build an improved city dock. And they followed all of the procedures necessary to apply for their CAMA permit and provide further notice to the city of their plans. Even after it seemed as though the city might be trying to find a way to pull the rug out from under them, my clients still invited discussions and made it clear that they were willing to make additional sacrifices on their development plans if needed to work in cooperation with the city. That cooperation isn't about asking you to change your zoning code. That cooperation was an acknowledgement of the reality that the city needs part of Southport Marina's riparian area to improve the city dock the way that you want to improve it. And we wanted to give it. We wanted to provide that encroachment agreement. We wanted to provide that opportunity, that vehicle for the city to use some of Southport Marina's riparian area. We just wanted, in return, for the city to be clear that they would honor that riparian boundary as well, and that they would support the installation of Southport Marina's docks as well. The city's response to all of those efforts was to string the marina along. They knew where they were going. They knew where they were going probably well before they said that to CAMA in April of 2020. Nobody said anything to Southport Marina until July 23rd of 2020, after my clients had expended significant time, expense, and heartache putting together detailed plans for their expansion. There is but one opportunity left in this city for that right to be wronged, and that's with you. You have the opportunity to look at the history, the course of conduct, and the recommendations and advice that was given to the city, to my client by the city, and correct the wrongful decision that Mr. Hargrove and Mr. Lloyd just delivered to my client at the end of July of 2020. And I respectfully ask that you do so. Thank you.
Okay, Colleen, you have any comments? All right, board, I'm going to ask you, have you enough evidence, enough facts to make a decision? Do you have any more questions of any of the witnesses or the attorneys to clarify anything that you need to consider? So everyone clear? Colin, you're okay?
Yeah, I would say that if at this time you're satisfied with the evidence that's been presented and there's no further questions, that you can move into board discussion and close the evidentiary hearing.
All right. We're going to take a vote, but because there is, and Colin and I have gone back and forth on this, we believe it's a majority, not a certain percentage of 75 or 80% of the membership, okay, of the board. So I'm going to make a motion, and I'll need a second. Then we'll have discussion on that motion, and then we'll vote. Understood? Okay.
Point of order. Is it simple majority of those present, or the majority of the number of members?
It's a simple majority of the members present here.
Okay. All right. So what we're dealing with is affirming the permit. Yes? You have a question, Peter? Oh, I thought you raised your hand. So I'm going to make the motion, and when I make the motion, I will explain how you will vote either for or against that motion, okay? I make a motion to affirm the city's denial of the permit to Southport Marina Incorporated. Do I have a second? All right, discussion. All right, we'll vote. Pete, how do you vote? When I say affirm, it means that you agree by saying, yes, I affirm.
Affirm, say it again.
Affirm means that if you want to affirm the city's denial, you will vote yes. If it's against, no. Okay?
I'm supporting the city.
Okay. So it's a yes. Lisa, yes or no?
Based on what we've seen today, I'll vote yes. Today, presented.
That's all that counts. Harley? Jennifer?
I vote yes.
Vote fast. Jess? Josh? And I vote yes. So it's a unanimous. We affirm the city's decision on the denial of the permit.
Thank you for your time and your consideration. We appreciate it.
Board, we have minutes to approve and sign, and we're out of here. Okay?
Chairman, I'm just moving we approve the minutes as submitted.
Do I have a second on the minutes approval?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Meeting's adjourned.